Sunday morning, jumped out of bed, put on my best suit, got in my car and raced like a jet, all the way to you. Walked in your church with heart in my hand to ask you a question, 'cause I know that you're a Calvinist friend, yeah. Can I question your doctrine without any strife? Say yes, 'cause I need to know. Say I'll never get your blessing till the day I die. Tough luck, my friend, but the answer is no. Why you gotta be so rude? Don't you know I'm Christian too? Why you gotta be so rude? I'm gonna question you anyway. Question tulip, question you anyway. Question tulip, yeah, no matter what you say. Question tulip, ain't what it ought to be. Why you gotta be so
rude? Welcome to Soteriology 101, where you know when the Why You Gotta Be So Rude song plays. We're going to be dealing with our favorite anti-provisionist interlocutor, Dr. James White. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for being a little late. Had a couple of issues jump up and some technical problems hit me. And so hopefully everything will be coming through okay. Those on the side chat, let me know sound-wise if everything's coming through, because I didn't get the chance to test everything because of the technical problems I was having. But let me just listen to this before we start, because I want you to hear something very clearly before we get into all this. Okay, listen.
Have elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of all the rest of us, as a demonstration of his glorious grace.
All right, hear that one more time.
He's going to have elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of all the rest of us, as a demonstration of his glorious grace.
Okay. I don't know how James White could be any more clear about his position on this. This is the position I have played in the very first video. I talked about the Ballgate, or however you pronounce it, Baal or Ballgate, whatever it is. I've always presented him as this is the position he holds to. I heard him say this years ago. I knew this has been his position. I knew it's the London Baptist Confession of Faith position, that there are elect infants. And there, therefore, are those who are not elect, like he says.
He's going to
right here.
have elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of all the rest of us, as a demonstration of his glorious grace.
So what happens to babies who are not elect? The same thing that happens to adults who are not elect. Presumably, according to the London Baptist Confession of Faith, that's what happens to them. Under the London Baptist Confession of Faith, it says elect infants will be saved. And then it goes on, and the very next point says, and the non-elect will be damned. It doesn't say non-elect infants, and then the second point, but that's the presumption. If you're not elect, you're not saved. And Dr. White believes that some infants are elect and some are not. How am I misrepresenting him, folks? You tell me how I'm misrepresenting him, because he keeps acting as if I'm misrepresenting him. I am the one who showed in the article from 1987 where he taught his old position, which now he's owned up to. He's actually acknowledged that, yes, back then, this is when he was first becoming Reformed. He reflected back upon his, independent Baptist roots, and he taught the age of accountability and that men were innocent until a particular age. He said, yeah, that's what I believed then, but I've been consistent for the last 40 years, he said, in the position I hold now. I know. I've been saying the exact same thing, Dr. White. You and I are saying the same thing about what you believe. You believe some infants are damned and not others. So you have a doctrine of infant damnation. We don't like that doctrine. Surprise, surprise. And therefore we're standing against it. And then you come out and start acting like we're misrepresenting you somehow. I don't understand this. And the reason I think that it's become such an issue is because Dr. White holds to a very old, high Calvinistic position. The modern day Calvinist of today, most of them, like John MacArthur, John Piper, Steve Lawson, Todd Friel, the list goes on and on and on. Most mainstream Calvinists that you know of don't teach infant damnation. They teach that God elects to save every aborted baby and every infant that dies, which I think is a more biblical a more consistently biblical doctrine. It's more in line with what I know to be the God of Scripture as I see him revealed through Jesus Christ. I am thankful for Calvinists like MacArthur and others who teach that, because heaven forbid somebody as influential as John MacArthur comes out and starts teaching that some infants are going to be punished by God in all eternity, that some babies will be aborted in the womb and wake up to damnation, and that's the only existence they will ever know. Thank God for that, because if somebody as influential as Piper and MacArthur starts teaching infant damnation on any level whatsoever, the damage that could do to the church and the reputation of God is just horrendous to even consider it. I don't want James White to hold to the position he holds to, because I think it impugns the character and the goodness of God. I would rather him be as inconsistent as MacArthur is being. And yes, I do think they're inconsistent with their Calvinism. I think James White's right on that. I think his view of federal headship and his view of inherited guilt, I think it demands this concept and idea that there are maybe possibly elect infants and those who will be damned. I think that's a consistent Calvinistic understanding. I've heard him, and I'm getting ahead of myself because there's some stuff I want to cover through the tweets that we'll go through here in a minute. But I don't know how to be any more. How can you be more fair to another person than to play them in their own words? And then when somebody says, well, you didn't understand the context, then play the entire video in its context, which I did on Twitter. It's like, here's the whole video. I sped it up so it all fit on there, but the whole video is there. He's held to the same position over and over and over again. He even references back in 2005 an article by Steve Camp. And I went to that article and read it, and it's the same thing. God has every right to show mercy to infants who die, and to pass them over if he so chooses. And who are you to question God if he does that? It's the same concept of infant damnation. Not all infants. I don't believe all infants are damned. I've never accused James White of believing all infants are damned. He always talks about there's two extremes. One extreme is everyone will be saved. All infants that die will be automatically gone up to heaven. Now, he calls that an extreme position. I don't know why that would be considered extreme, to say that God wouldn't punish infants when they die. I don't know why that's an extreme version, but apparently he thinks John MacArthur and Piper and others who believe that all infants who die will go straight to heaven is an extreme on one side, and the other extreme on the other side is every baby that dies, or every baby that's aborted, including mentally ill, would be included all within that. They will go straight to hell because they haven't exercised faith, or they're just going to assume that God didn't elect them because they never heard the gospel. Almost like you would do if you have some tribe out in the middle of nowhere. If God in his sovereignty didn't bring the gospel to that tribe, then that just proves that tribe wasn't elect. And so too, those who die in infancy just proves that they weren't really elect. And so all infants that die are mentally handicapped, that don't have the capacity to believe, they would automatically just be damned under the curse of sin that they inherited from Adam. And so that's an extreme version. I honestly don't know of anyone who believes that. Personally, of any Calvinistic sort, maybe the Westboro Baptist types, I don't know, but that would be the other extreme. The other extreme is every baby goes to hell that dies, and the other extreme is every baby that dies goes to heaven. Those are the two extremes, and White has said over and over again, I'm in the middle. And what's the middle? Some babies are elect and some aren't. How am I misrepresenting James White? I'm not. I'm spelling out exactly what he teaches, exactly what he said, verbatim, over and over and over again. And yet I'm accused of misrepresenting him. Now, there's a guy named Namor, N-A-M-O-R-P-B or something like that on Twitter, who posted a 2005 quote from White out of context, showing that he supported his 1987 view. And it shows him quoting from Zwingli, and that every infant that dies is elect and will go to heaven. And he shows me this quote, and he says, see, James White holds the same position in 2005 that he did in 1987, and he holds it today, Namor says. And then James White likes that, and he even thanks Namor for defending him. He says, I don't have time right now to defend me, and I appreciate you defending me in this. Thank you. I'm like going, oh, wait a second. Maybe I'm wrong here. What's going on? he's liking this tweet that's saying that in 2005, he held to the exact same view as he did in 1987. And I'm confused by this. And I even reply going, I'm shocked. I was certain that James White didn't hold to that view. And here's a video proving it. How do you explain this? And you're telling me he not only held to it in 2005, but he holds to it today? That the same view that he held in 1987? Is that what you're saying, Namer? And Namer was like, yes, that's what I'm saying. He absolutely has been consistent ever since 1987 to now. He's always held to the same view that MacArthur holds to. Every infant that dies is elect and be saved, just like Zwingli. And I'm going, really? I don't think so. I really don't think that that's what he says. Look at this video and look what he just now tweeted the other day. That doesn't make any sense. But then I see he liked Namer's tweet and he thanked Namer for defending him. I'm going, okay, now this is really confusing. And so I tweet back out, well, I'm mistaken. I guess in 2005, White affirmed that he does believe, like MacArthur and the rest, that every infant that dies is elect and will be saved. And I don't understand how that's consistent with this tweet he just put out and all these other videos where he defends the middle view. And then James White accuses me of misrepresentation. Oh, I've been the same view the whole time, and you're blah blah blah, and you're consistent. You pulled that quote from 2005 out of context. Dr. White, I didn't pull that quote. Your friend Namer, who I was told on one of the tweets, he works with you. Namer pulled that tweet. That quote, not me. It's just like, and so you liked it and you thanked him. Am I living in bizarro world here? This is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going, I'm the one who said, no, Namer, you're wrong. I was defending you, Dr. White. I was defending the fact that you don't hold to the same view you did back in 1987. And you even tell us reasons in one of your tweets. You say it's because it's not consistent with your view of federal headship and inherited guilt. It becomes the biggest, what did you say, heaven-filling device in the world, something of that nature, which I have a lot to say about that. Think about the, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but let me just say this. Dr. MacArthur actually uses that as one of his reasons he does think every aborted baby goes to heaven, is that that's the way God in his sovereignty is filling heaven. Believe it or not, that's one of the arguments MacArthur actually makes, and White rejects it for the same exact reason that MacArthur accepts it. And so what are the alternatives, Dr. White? Because on your view, God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, including every abortion. And therefore, you've got God filling hell and heaven? Is that your view? Is that God's ordaining abortion so as to fill heaven and hell, at least a portion of heaven and a portion of hell? MacArthur says God ordains abortion because God ordains whatsoever comes to pass in Calvinism. He's ordaining abortion so as to fill heaven with all tribes and tongues that may not hear the gospel. That's his reasoning. I'll let you hear the video if you want to hear it. But his reasoning is that abortion can be the way in which God in his sovereignty is filling heaven. MacArthur actually argues that point. White rejects the concept of infant salvation for the exact same reason. He says abortion becomes the greatest heaven-filling device that he could possibly imagine. Therefore, you can't accept that that's what's happening. And so the alternative is God is ordaining abortion to fill at least a portion of hell. Is that really the position you want to take? This is where it's just like, are you listening to yourself? Do you realize you've surrendered your sense-making over to a systematic that makes God inconceivable and what he would do to be inconceivable? This is what Warren was talking about when he was comparing the mindset of those who sacrifice their children to pagans, okay? He was not saying that all Reformed people everywhere just don't like their babies or all the other stuff. They don't really care if as long as they're elect, they don't care about their babies. I know some people took it that way, and maybe he could have been more clear about it in context or whatever. Okay, I get it. And I apologized on one of the bottom videos. If you took it that way, I'm sorry you took it that way, because that's certainly how I took him. I would have stopped him if I took him to mean that. I didn't take him to mean that Calvinists don't love their children, or Calvinists were willing to sacrifice their kids for their own election. I didn't take it that way. I took it like, okay, let me give another example. This is the way I took it. Almost like when we say something like, let me put it in the screen. There's a certain mindset. I put it in words so that I put it on the screen here. All those who serve and obey a deity, whether that deity is true or not, okay, any deity, a false deity, a pagan god, whatever it is, anybody who's willing to serve and obey, honor a deity that they believe would damn infants who die, are sharing the same mindset regardless of what deity that is. So, for example, we've talked about Gnosticism before. Calvinism shares the same mindset as Gnosticism, at least in one area. What's that area? Determinism. Gnostics were theistic determinists. Calvinists are theistic determinists. Does that mean that Calvinists are exactly like Gnostics in every single way, shape, and form? No. There's one mindset they share. They share a deterministic philosophy. You've heard people compare Calvinists to Muslims or Islam, right? Does it say that the Calvinistic doctrine, therefore, is exactly like Islamic doctrine? Of course not. They share one common denominator. They both believe that God is deterministic and works deterministically. They're sharing a same mindset, right? And it requires you to hold to that mindset, to be willing to surrender your sense-making up so much that you're willing to adopt and swallow the inconceivable concept and idea that God would punish an infant who dies. And you're not even, it's like you're not even hearing what you're saying. And you're like, somebody needs to come up and just slap you and go, wake up, brother. You can't possibly believe that about the God you love and serve, could you? Surely you don't. Surely not. How do you sleep believing that? I don't know. I can't relate to you in that way. I don't understand how you could possibly affirm that God would be the kind of God that would do that, knowing what you know about him through the revelation of Jesus Christ, what you learn about him through Peter and Paul and all the scriptures that we love and the Psalms that we read. I don't know how you understand God that way. Now you can, maybe you've adopted a cognitive dissonance that I just can't understand or I can't relate to. I don't know. Even as a Calvinist, I never held to that view. I was never that extreme. So you may say, well, he just wasn't ever reformed. If that's what you mean by reformed, then amen, I was never that, okay? I was a John Piper-esque kind of Calvinist. And even John Piper-esque, even as hard as he is on with his views of Edwards and others that he held to, he has been hardcore about the belief that all infants are saved by God and that they are not guilty because of revelation, and that the fact that they can't understand and receive revelation and light until a particular age, more of an age of accountability kind of process there. And so that's the way I took Warren's comment, was that in order for you to come to that point that you're willing to give your baby up to this deity, you're willing to serve and honor and do whatever it takes to follow this deity in order to save yourself and give yourself crops, do whatever you're willing. That mindset that you're willing to take on is a similar mindset that you're willing to say, I'm serving and loving a God that I genuinely believe would damn an infant. I cannot relate to you on that point. I can't comprehend that view of God. And I honestly believe, as nice as I know how to be, I don't want you promoting that view, because I think it's hurting the kingdom. I think you should shut up about that view if you hold to it. I think you should keep it really secret. And the thing is when we try to represent you and try to call you out on it, and you pretend like you don't really believe it, like James White's doing, and you dodge and you make it about, oh, I can't believe Leighton's bringing up all this stuff about baptismal regeneration. I never brought up baptismal regeneration. It's a red herring. So he brings up baptismal regeneration as if I never said anything about any of those concepts. And he keeps diverting over to something else and then throwing Warren under the bus and calling him all kinds of names along the process. And we're going to watch some of it. You'll see some of it for yourself. But it's one of those things that I know that it's a sensitive topic because it's about infants, for goodness sake. And anytime you're talking about the salvation of infants, it's difficult. I get it. It's emotional. I get it. And there's some people who've lost babies, who've had miscarriages, or maybe even went through a time in their life where they were okay with abortion and aborted a baby, and now they're struggling with that. One of the videos that MacArthur plays actually addresses those people and the ability to find redemption. And he even comforts them in that video, saying you can know for sure that your infant is in heaven, and that one day you will be able to meet that infant, that you can be with that infant if you follow Jesus. And he uses that as an evangelistic tool for those who have aborted their children. And so I thank God for the inconsistency of some Calvinists to teach that God does have the kind of mercy and love and grace that shows that kind of compassion for those in infancy. But part of the inconsistency and part of the reason I think someone like James White doesn't go there with MacArthur is because, well, MacArthur doesn't have to debate these topics. He didn't have to go through cross-examination. James White does. And so James White has to be consistent within his system in order to stand cross-examination. And he knows full well that when you begin to press the question, why would God show more mercy and grace to an infant who's unable to respond because of his capacities than an adult when they're born under Calvinism unable to believe? In other words, there's no more ability for a 70-year-old man than a 7-month-old baby. If they're reprobate, they're reprobate. They never had the ability to believe the truth. And so on what basis are you holding the 7-month-old innocent and saving the 7-month-old, but not the 70-year-old when both of them are equally unable to respond positively to the gospel? I suspect that's why people like James White are willing to swallow the difficult pill of infant damnation, because they know it's the only way to defend their precious Calvinistic perspective of inherited guilt under the headship of Adam. And thank you, but I don't see any reason that the concept and understanding of federal headship has to include inherited guilt and can't include what MacArthur and Piper and others include with regard to the responsibility of a particular age of person. There's nothing in Romans 5 that's specific enough to lead you to, you can't hold to Zwingli's view. You can't hold to Millard Erickson's view. You can't hold to any other view except our view of original guilt. The one that was introduced by Augustine, who believed that baptismal regeneration of infants and believed that he even uses the illustration. This is not my illustration. This is Augustine's illustration. The two mothers are carrying their babies on the way to the baptismal pool, and an infant were to die in the arms of one of the mothers before they got to the baptismal pool, that infant would be damned. Okay, that's not, I'm not trying to be emotional. I'm not trying to be mean. That's Augustine's view. Okay. And the other one who makes it to the baptismal waters that infant will be saved is his illustration. That's preposterous. And I think anybody who's not just a Kool-Aid drinking person who's just adopted this way of just surrendered their sense making over to this systematic, inconceivable as it may be, can see how just devastating that kind of doctrine is to the church and to individuals who've lost loved ones. There may be some who get offended by the fact that we talk about these things, but who's actually the one who's teaching people that God's going to save your baby if it dies? We are. So if you're going to be offended by anybody, why don't you get offended with those who say, well, God might not? And who are you to question God if he chooses to, send your baby to punishment for eternity? I mean, who are you to question God if he does that? You need to worship him anyway. And if you don't feel like worshiping, then you're probably not really elect anyway. Because, you should love God no matter how horrendous we say he is. Where's the line, brothers? What are you willing to say about God? How far are you willing to go when you're ultimately putting onto God, at the doorstep of God, the most heinous possible conceivable thing that anybody can ever imagine, which is tormenting or damning a innocent baby who's aborted in the womb? I can't think of a more heinous thing for anybody to do, much less the God who sent his son to die for us. Why would you tell people that? I'm sorry. I get emotional about these kinds of things because I just can't fathom how somebody can go that far. I was never that far in my Calvinism. So I can't, this is maybe the first time in my work through all this process that I've really had to kind of sit with this enough, not to let the cognitive dissonance, let it roll over me, but just to go, wow, have you sat with that really? People who hold to that view, have you sat with it really and grappled with that? Does it bother you at least? Is it at least something you can say like Calvin does, that's a dreadful decree? It's I don't know. I don't know how people deal with that, but I want you to watch and hear how other Calvinists have dealt with this issue in comparison and side by side with the way White has dealt with it. And maybe that will help you to see each one. Watch it.
God in grace saves the little ones that die. And I think the case is made all through the scripture that he does that. In the Old Testament, for example, when pagans, idol worshippers, offered their children to Moloch and set their baby on a fire, and it was incinerated, the prophet Jeremiah called it the death of the innocents. God even refers to those sacrificed babies as innocent. That's pretty significant. They are innocent, which means they're not guilty. I think another passage that weighs in on this is Mark 10, where Jesus said, "Permit the little children to come to me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." Pretty hard to dismiss that. And then he did something that he never did for unbelievers. He gathered those little ones into his arms, and the text says he blessed them. You can't find a place in the Bible where God places blessing on people who aren't part of his kingdom.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. Before we move on, I want you just to let that sink in, what you just heard MacArthur say, that the reason they are not condemned, he says, is because they are not guilty, they are innocent. That's the point of the video, because he's answering the question, do aborted babies, what happens to them? He's answering that question, and he's saying that they're innocent. Now, I played that portion of it on Twitter and said, I've been called a Pelagian so many times I can't count it, for saying the exact same thing you just heard John MacArthur say. So where's the consistency Calvinist? Where are the Calvinists coming out saying John MacArthur is a Pelagian? Well, of course, Phil Johnson chimes in. Phil Johnson's the ghostwriter for all things John MacArthur. And he chimes in on Twitter and says, well, it's a different kind of innocence. Okay, so let's get our Calvinist to English dictionaries out and add yet another duplicitous term. You've got two kinds of calling. The common call for everybody, and then the effectual call. Two kinds of will, prescriptive kind of will, and then the decreative kind of will. The kind of wills that contradict each other. Love, you got the common kind of love, but then you got the salvific kind of love. And life, you got the regenerative kind of life, and then you've got the eternal life, as if regenerative life isn't eternal, because you have to have that in order to make, you have to have these categories created in order to make your system fit, to unfalsify your system, because obviously people are going to be able to bring so many verses against what I just said to be true. And so what do I have to do? I have to unfalsify it. So I have to create two different senses of everything, even if they contradict each other. The whole reason MacArthur produced this video is to explain why infants wouldn't ever go to hell. And he uses the argument they're not guilty, they're innocent. And he comes across and says, oh, it's innocent in a different sense. They're still cursed under Adam, as guilty under Adam, but they haven't committed any moral sin. And so therefore they're innocent in that sense. Okay, if they're guilty enough to where they would be damned to go to hell for their guilt, and what kind of sense does it matter? It's like the inability thing. Oh, they're not unable in that sense, they're unable in this sense. Okay, I understand the concepts of the moral inability versus physical inability. You tie somebody to a tree and therefore they can't come to you to give a right sacrifice, versus they don't want to give the right sacrifice because of the nature they were born with. Those are different senses of inability. But guess what? Both of them are completely unable. And whether God ties them to a tree or he makes their nature such from birth that they can't want to bring the right sacrifice, either way, they are just as unable. And there's just as much reason to reject that, whether he's tying them to a tree or he's decreeing their desires to be such that they could never want to do anything that he's calling them to do. Either way, they're unable. And so the same objection arises in both scenarios, whether he's tying them to a tree physically or whether he's controlling their desires and nature by decree from birth. Both of them deserve the same objection. And therefore saying, well, it's because he doesn't want to, doesn't answer the objection, because you're not addressing the fact that he doesn't control what he wants, according to Calvinism. He didn't have any choice in the matter, according to Calvinism. Not really. And this is the same exact issue with innocence. What kind of innocence does they have if they're condemned under Adam, but yet you're saying they're innocent in order to justify their not going to hell? This is why James White is more consistent in his Calvinism. And so I commend James White for his consistency with the doctrinal system that he holds to, though I abhor the fact that he's so inconsistent with the character of God as revealed in Scripture. But at least he's being consistent with the claims of the Bible. And I think Phil Johnson's probably smart enough to see that. So why he doesn't just acknowledge the fact that he's appealing to a mystery, so to speak, as to why it is that infants wouldn't be considered guilty underneath the way in which Calvinists have misinterpreted Romans chapter 5 based upon a false Latin reading introduced by Augustine in the 5th century and not held to, at least as far as I can tell, by any church father prior to Augustine, which at least, if nothing else, should make it questionable, don't you think?
And that's an act of grace.
I was on the same stage with Phil when that question was asked, and
he's talking about Phil Johnson there, and Phil Johnson supports what MacArthur teaches with regard to all infants being saved. So he's saying I was on the stage with Phil Johnson.
We differentiated our positions because I don't hold to MacArthur's view on that.
Notice it says, I do not hold to MacArthur's view on that. So I disagree with John MacArthur. I don't believe that all infants who die go to heaven. That's his view.
Through human history of human beings have been conceived and died before they ever reached a condition of accountability, before they could ever understand law and grace and sin and salvation.
Non-elect people cannot spiritually understand sin, salvation, all those things he just mentioned because of their condition from birth. This is why MacArthur's not consistent in his Calvinism, because there's no more reasonable reason to hold a 70-year-old, like I said before, responsible under Calvinism, because spiritually he can't understand any more so than an infant can because of the condition he can't control. So the reason we don't hold people responsible or punishable or blameworthy when they don't have any control over the situation. This is why you don't judge somebody for the color of their skin, or you don't throw somebody in prison for having a brain aneurysm or something like that, and wrecking their car and hurting somebody. You wouldn't throw them in jail for that because they didn't have any control over that. You don't hold people responsible for or accountable for or punishable for things they don't have any control over. And what is Calvinism? Calvinism is the basic doctrinal belief that you have absolutely no control over whether or not you're saved. You have absolutely no control over whether or not you're reprobate. You have absolutely no control of the choices and decisions you make in light of the gospel and the appeal of God to be reconciled. That is the basis of the entire Calvinistic system. So the very same reasons that you're arguing for infant salvation, John MacArthur, are the very same reasons that we are arguing that Calvinism cannot be biblically supported in any rational way as far as we can tell. And I think that's what James White sees. He knows that's such an inconsistent position that God would show mercy to infants because of their inabilities, but not to adults when they're just as unable as the infant is.
Before they could ever consciously reject the truth. What is their eternal destiny? Well, the Scripture weighs very heavily on the fact that they are received into heaven as redeemed souls to live forever with God.
Die for us. Do we really think that he's going to take an infant or a baby who has been ripped to shreds in his mother's womb from an abortion vacuum, that he's going to send that child to hell? Does that sound like God's character and nature to you? Baby.
You know, Todd Friel, I put this video out, and Seth Dillon, the CEO of the Babylon Bee, real reasonable fellow, obviously very good at debating. I'd love to see a debate with him and White, by the way. Let's just put that out there in the universe sphere and see what happens with it. Universe sphere. I think I just made up a word. But Todd, he was saying it's interesting that Todd Friel can say that as a Calvinist. And I heard no outrage from Todd Friel saying that. I didn't even know that clip existed until just recently. And I never heard any Calvinist coming after Todd Friel for saying that. But if heaven forbid, one of us say the exact same thing you just heard Todd Friel say, let's just back up and let's just hear Todd Friel one more time.
As redeemed souls to live forever with God.
Die for us. Do we really think that he's going to take an infant or a baby who has been ripped to shreds in his mother's womb from an abortion vacuum, that he's going to send that child to hell? Does that sound like God's character and nature?
Does that sound like God's character and nature to you? No. I I'm screaming, no, it doesn't sound like God's character and nature. No, it does not, Todd. Amen, high five, way to go, slap on the back. Yeah, I disagree with your soteriology, but at least you haven't surrendered all your common sense over to this doctrinal way of thinking. And this is what Seth Dillon was saying. Todd Friel is saying out loud what every Provisionist and Arminian has been yelling for decades and for centuries, okay? No, you don't do that. Caveat, wait, let me be fair. I read an article that showed that there are some extreme forms of quote unquote Arminian concepts and ideas that were actually arguing that because a baby is not old enough to have a cognizant, faith, to believe and put their faith in God, that even infants that die go to hell because they've not reached an age where they can put faith in God. And so there are some who are still on the Augustinian grid, apparently, because they've adopted this concept of inherited guilt under the Augustinian grid. And I've never met an Arminian like that in my day, but just doing the study on this, I learned that there were Arminians who were arguing for this back in the day. So I'm trying to be fair here and saying this is not just a Calvinist problem historically. This has been a problem with anybody who has adopted the Augustinian grid of inherited guilt. I think that's the seed to this whole problem is the Romans 5 bad Latin translation, which even Calvinistic scholars admit that it was a bad Latin translation. They still may think that his interpretation of it was okay, but it's just a fact of the matter that he was using a bad Latin translation. He didn't know Greek. So his translation of Romans 5 was a unique, idiosyncratic, very different way, probably influenced by his Gnostic and pagan roots, that he led the church into a different way of thinking about humanity from that day forward. If you don't believe me, read Irenaeus and Ignatius and Polycarp and Justin Martyr and all of them standing up against Gnosticism, making a lot of the same arguments you hear me making against determinism. And just test it and say, maybe Augustine led the Western church in the wrong way. Maybe there's a reason that Eastern Orthodoxy, even with its problems, doesn't have this debate. Why? Because they don't rely on Augustine, hardly at all. And I'm just thinking, maybe if we just divorce ourselves a little bit from some of those Augustinian ways of thinking and some of the false ways of understanding our God and anthropology and the way God created us, and understand that, yes, there's a curse. Yes, we were cast out of the garden. Yes, there are results of the fall. People say, oh, you don't believe in anything that resulted in the fall. You have no idea, concept of the fall. Baloney. The fall had huge amounts of conflict and problems in our lives and sin and curse. But listen to the actual narrative. It says you're going to have labor pains, the toiling of the soil, and you're cast out of my presence, which is what death is talking about. Separation from God. You're cast out of the garden. Did he forget to mention the worst of all curses? Oh, by the way, from now on, you and your children and every descendant from you, you won't be able to respond positively to anything I tell you. Not unless I pick you before you're born unilaterally and regenerate you and recreate you into a new ontological human being that causes you to want to listen to me. That's the unspoken result of the fall that I never mentioned. Yeah, I'll make sure you know about having to mow your lawn now, and I'll make sure you know, hey, women, be careful, it's going to hurt. You know, you could pray for epidurals to be invented really quickly because it's going to hurt. But I just forgot to mention, your babies are going to be born guilty and God haters, and they can only hate God unless I picked them before they were born for reasons I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to pick some of them and not others. And I'm going to regenerate them. I'm going to change them into new creations and cause them to want to love me. Probably about 10% or so of those who come of age. And that's the way it all works now because of the fall. Because of what you did, Adam, you caused everybody to be born God haters. And I'm punishing everybody for you eating the forbidden fruit by doing it. Come on. That's not what the scripture ever teaches. It doesn't even come close to teaching anything like that. Aaron, thank you for your super chat. He says, what's the difference between God declaring a baby innocent and God declaring a believing sinner innocent other than faith in Jesus? God can have, one thing I will agree with Calvinists of what Paul says, God can have mercy on whomever he wants to have mercy. And I think it's pretty clear throughout the scriptures, and what we see through the revelation of scripture is that God wants to show mercy to babies who have not yet sinned. And I think he wants to show mercy to those who confess their sins and trust in him. So yes, we agree. God shows mercy to whomever he wants to show mercy. He saves whomever he wants to save. We agree with that. But what does the Bible say? Who does the Bible reveal to us that God wants to save? The weak, the lowly, the humble. I can't think of a more weak, lowly, humble being than an infant, an aborted baby. What's more weak and humble than that? If God wants to show grace to the weak and humble, he can. Who's stopping him from doing that? Nobody. And we're saying he's free. He's free to do that. And we believe he does based upon the character that he reveals through Christ. Why wouldn't he do something like that? He's a good God. Why wouldn't he show love? Starbucks money. Hey, you know how to get to my heart, Arctic Canyon. Thank you. Appreciate that. It won't be used for Starbucks, but it goes straight to the back to the ministry. But thank you. I appreciate the thought.
To you.
Babies and imbeciles, that is, those with profound mental disabilities, don't have access to the knowledge that they will be called to account for, and therefore somehow, in some way, God, through Christ, covers these people. So that's in a nutshell why I think all children who die in infancy are elect, and that they will be, through Jesus Christ, saved in ways that I may not know how.
Okay, so in ways I don't know how necessarily how it works. In other words, it's not real consistent with the rest of my claims of my system, but I do believe that they will be saved, and thank God for him believing that. He's a very influential pastor, so I'm thankful that he believes that and teaches that. But notice how clear he is. There's no question about where he stands on this. It's very clear, just like MacArthur. It's very clear. Why is it so hard to pin James White down on what he believes? Especially when we play him in his own words, because he seems pretty clear in this clip, and I'm not sure why he won't just come right out and say it now, except that all the backlash he's getting from people like Namor, whoever that was on Twitter, who's trying to defend James White as being the guy who represented God Saves All back in 1987. And he's realizing for the very first time, possibly, I don't know what's happening in his mind, because he has to be going, okay, wait, maybe, oops. I have to think Namor came to his senses here and finally realizes, oh yeah, the guy that I hold up as my hero here doesn't believe what I thought he believed. And he's got to deal with that now.
As God honors this.
So on the one side, you have people who say, oh, sorry, no faith, automatic hell for you. And then the people on the other side don't need it, automatic heaven for you. And I'm in the middle going, I think God's probably consistent here. And he's going to have elect infants. And then there are others who will not be. He's going to have elect infants. And then there are others who will not be. He's going to have elect infants. And then there are others who will not be. I think God's probably consistent here. And he's going to have elect infants. And then there are others who will not be. And
you're like, why did you play that so many times? Because I'm being accused of misrepresenting him for saying that. I put on Twitter, James White believes there are some infants who are elect and others who will not be. What happens to people who are not elect? They're damned. Is there a purgatory that I don't know about in Calvinist world, in their belief systems, in White's world? Not that I've ever heard. So what are the two options? Elect to salvation or reprobated non-elect to damnation. If you have non-elect infants, you're promoting infant damnation. And I say it out loud and I'm in trouble? I'm misrepresenting you? Are we in bizarro world? Seriously, if anybody who follows James White, he doesn't watch my follow-up videos, apparently. He only watches clips. So do me a favor, clip me out asking this question in a little 30-second bite and send it to him. He might block you because it's what he says he does in his videos when you send him clips of, well, if it's Warren, he'll block you. If you send him a clip of Warren, if you ever want to get blocked by White, just send him a clip of Warren. Because he says in his video, he just automatically blocks the person. So that's the way to get blocked. That's the way to get blocked by James White. And I'm sure I'll probably get on that list pretty soon if I'm not already.
I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of all the rest of us, as a demonstration of his glorious grace.
Leading light among Calvinistic thinkers. All who die in infancy are saved. This is inferred from what the Bible teaches of the analogy between Adam and Christ.
This is a brother I found on YouTube. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. And he's reading from Charles Hodge here. And so And he's defending the fact that most Calvinists, mainstream Calvinists throughout the ages, have believed that all infants are elect and will go to heaven. Okay, so that's what this guy's defending. And so I'm contrasting this with what you just heard from White, saying there are some elect infants and others who are not. And now here's Charles Hodge, debunking or representing another view from a Calvinist who does believe all infants are saved.
The scriptures nowhere exclude any class of infants, baptized or unbaptized, born in Christian or in heathen lands, of believing or unbelieving parents, from the benefits of the redemption of Christ.
Do you see how clear he is? Does he leave any loophole? Does he leave anything vague? Charles Hodge, he goes through every single scenario and lays it out so clearly. This is what I believe. This is what I think it is. In other words, Calvinists who want to be clear. And again, James White was very clear about what he believed back in 1987 too, wasn't he? Yeah, he was very clear. When you hold to a view that you're proud of God, and it makes you proud of God, you're really clear about that position, aren't you? When you hold to a view that you're not proud of, and it's kind of shameful, you got to be vague, kind of talk in hushed tones. And anybody who brings it up, you shame them. How dare you even bring this up? We want to make this a debate topic? And get really angry with you. What's he doing? He's projecting. He's projecting his own shame. He's ashamed of the God he believes in. He's ashamed of what God does. And so anybody who calls him out on that, what does he do? He projects his shame onto them. Shame on you, Warren. You want to defend the holiness and the goodness and glory of God against the doctrine of infant damnation? Shame on you for even wanting to do that. And the real shame should be on the person who's promoting the concept and idea that God would punish an infant who dies. Because even James White recognized back in 1987, even when he was a Calvinist at the time, because he was a Calvinist. You read the rest of that article, he was a Calvinist. But he was at least willing, he had not surrendered his sense-making over so much so that he was willing to adopt that way of thinking, even calling it inconceivable that God would punish an innocent baby. I still think it's inconceivable. And the fact that there are people who are willing to defend that, I think is an important role within the church. Because when you don't have guardrails, you don't have people calling out that kind of inconsistency, that kind of false teaching, willing to say, guys, where are we going with this? Why are people partnering with someone who believes something so completely inconceivable as that about our God? This is what keeps the guardrails of the church up. And if there's not people willing to stand up and go, and some of you who are friends with James White, who believe like we do, that infants don't go to hell and that infants are not damned, and who are not calling James White out to pull back on the reins of his high Calvinism, then shame on you for being a Kool-Aid drinker that's not willing to confront the leaders that you follow for holding to doctrines that you don't believe are biblical just because you happen to be in the same, quote, soteriological camp that they are in.
John Newton. Perhaps you've heard of John Newton, the author of Amazing Grace and many other of our hymns. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "Nor can I doubt in my private judgment that infants are included in the election of grace. Perhaps those who die in infancy are the exceeding great multitude of all people, nations, and languages mentioned."
That's, by the way, that's John Newton's argument right there. That's the same argument that MacArthur makes in the rest of that video, where he's basically saying God is using infant, mortality and abortion, those kinds of things, to fill up heaven with all the other races of people that are out there that don't hear the gospel. That's his speculation there. So they're using the exact same argument that White uses to accept infant salvation that White uses to reject universal infant salvation.
In Revelation 7:9, in distinction from the visible body of professing believers who were marked in their foreheads and openly known to be the Lord's. That was John Newton. Lorraine Bettner, he was a theologian from the 20th century. I have a few of his books as well. Calvinism extends saving grace far beyond the boundaries of the visible church. If it is true that all of those who die in infancy, in heathen as well as in Christian lands, are saved, then more than half of the human race up to the present time has been among the elect.
See, it's the greatest heaven-filling device. So infant death and abortion is the greatest heaven-filling device. But notice they're using it that's a good reason to accept universal infant salvation from a Calvinistic vantage point. It's the same exact reason that White listed as one of his 3 reasons for rejecting it.
Charles Spurgeon, another very famous Calvinistic minister. It has been wickedly, lyingly, and slanderously said of Calvinists that we believe that some little children perish. Those who make the accusation know that their charge is false.
Okay, and I saw someone post this in response to one of our videos because we were saying that some Calvinists teach this, namely people like James White, who teach this middle view that some, not all, are infants are elect. And they post this and basically saying we're the wicked, lying, slanderous people who are saying that Calvinists believe this. But we're the ones, guys, we're the ones that saying not all Calvinists believe this. Go back and listen to, Warren did a video, 3 years ago, where he played MacArthur's view. Now, we don't think MacArthur's consistent, just like his view of God's universal love is not consistent either. We don't believe they're consistent within the claims of Calvinism, and we're going to call them out on that. But that's a blessed inconsistency, because they're being more consistent with the Bible on those points and less consistent with Calvinism on those points. Y'all remember back in the day when I played that clip from John Piper? He's in a prison doing a question answer in prison. And one of the prisoners, and I don't even know if Piper knew it was being recorded or not. He may or may not. I'm speculating on that, but I can't imagine that he would say this knowing he was being recorded. But remember, he said something to the effect, because he's asked the question about, God determining everything. And he said, what about this? And that doesn't make any sense. How do you do this? It doesn't, how does this, he's just asking these questions about the implications of determinism. And Piper answers him by saying, well, sometimes it's more important to be more biblical than more Calvinistic. In other words, he was putting the dichotomy of being biblical versus being Calvinistic. And that's why I don't know if he knew he was being recorded, because he was basically telling the guy, yeah, you might need to act inconsistently with your Calvinism in order to be consistent with your Bible, which, by the way, there's a famous quote from Spurgeon on that very issue with regard to 1 Timothy 2:4, because he reflects on the fact that he says, there are a lot of old Calvinists. I'm very familiar with the old Calvinist way of getting around the alls of Scripture. But he said, I am not going to be, I can be inconsistent with myself and inconsistent with my doctrine, but I'm not going to be inconsistent with what the obvious teaching of the Word of God is. And that is, God desires all to be saved. And so he holds to that universal desire of God for all to be saved, just like John Calvin with John 3:16. John Calvin doesn't do the textual gymnastics that you see from James White, trying to get around the whosoever will of John 3:16. John Calvin just says, yes, this is a universal term, and he admits and confesses the universal love that God has for all of creation. And so you may think, how in the world do Calvinists who hold to that view get away with it? Well, that's the two wills of God. There's the prescriptive external will. Yes, externally, God loves everybody. Internally, behind the scenes, duplicitly, it sounds like to us anyway, is the decreative or the salvific kind of love. Yeah, I love you enough to show you rain and sunshine, but ultimately you're determined to be an unbeliever because of the nature you were born with that I decreed for you to have, and you're going to be damned forever for something you absolutely have no control over. But I'll show you rain and sunshine and some common blessings if you happen to live in a nice part of the world, at least. That's not love, folks. The Bible does not define that as love in 1 Corinthians 13. It defines what love is, and it even says you can give all your money to the poor. In other words, you can be benevolent and help them, give them rain and sunshine, give them nice gifts. But if you have not love, it's worthless. It's a gong. It's a symbol. It means nothing. What's true love? It's patience. It's kindness. It's goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. It's the kind of love that's not self-seeking. It's not seeking its own. Keep that in mind, because we'll get back to that in a little bit, because that's what we're going to be talking about in today's program when we play from James White here, what he says about us in a little while, because it gets to the heart of this issue. All right, let's go with the
I cannot even dare to hope, though I would wish to do so, that they ignorantly misrepresent us. They wickedly repeat what has been denied 1,000 times, that they know is not true, or what they know is not true. I know of no exception, but we all hope and believe that all persons dying in infancy are elect. And John Gill, who was, I believe, Spurgeon's predecessor, he was a Baptist minister. I think I have some of his commentaries as well. I've referred to them in the past. They who have fallen asleep in infancy have not perished. We have never taught the contrary. And when the charge is brought, I repudiate it and say, you may have said so, we never did. And you know we never did. If you dare to repeat the slander again, let the lie stand in scarlet on your very cheek, if you be capable of a blush. We have never dreamed of such a thing. With very few and rare exceptions, so rare that I have never heard of them except from the lips of slanderers, we have never imagined that infants dying as infants have perished. But we have...
Well, again, he must not have ever listened to James White, or those who hold that middle position, that there are some elect infants and others who are not elect. And what happens to elect infants? And what happens to non-elect infants? Again, he says it's so rare, this view is so rare, he's never heard it except from slanderers. And I guess they didn't have YouTube back then or the internet back then for him to hear people like James White.
I believe that they enter into the paradise of God. Pretty strong language to people who lie against us and say that we believe that infants perish in hell, as has been pointed out. Now, there are some theological problems.
Now, I left that in there because he goes on to describe some of the theological problems, and those theological problems are the exact reason that I already described: the federal headship issue, inherited guilt issues, the heaven-filling device issues that James White brings up as reasons for rejecting the concept of automatic infant salvation, that everyone will be saved. But I wanted to make sure that you at least heard all of those before we went on. I want to add to the stage here some of the video that we're going to be looking at for today's broadcast, because we're going to get into some pretty intense stuff, I think, because this really gets to the heart, I believe, of the major contention between us. And before we do that, I need to take care of something that is just being reminded about. My phone just rung. That reminded me of something that I'm supposed to do and I forgot to do. And so Trinity will love this, because I haven't mentioned Trinity, and I just spoke on Trinity Radio yesterday. I had a great conversation with those guys for a couple of hours, and talked about all manner of things. Didn't even know where we were going to go and all of those things, but we had a lot of fun doing that. But I'll play this commercial while I'll go take care of this issue real quick, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for a solid theological education? Professor Leighton Flowers is now teaching online courses for Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. With over 45 years of established, respected, and proven excellence in academic ministry training, Trinity has provided education for hundreds of ministers now serving around the globe. Get your degree online at Trinity, or audit any one of the many courses offered to improve your ministry skills. Trinity is flexible to meet the demands of any minister. Get a quality education on your schedule at an affordable price. Discounts are offered for podcast listeners. Use the promo code FLOWERS when you enroll online. For more details, go to Soteriology101.com and click on the classroom link at the top of the page. We invite you to join Professor Flowers in fulfilling the legacy of Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary.
All right. Let's jump right into where White addressed us. This is from yesterday. And he addressed one little tweet that I had earlier, but I didn't want to get into all of that because it has to do with limited atonement, and he's about to have a debate on that topic. And so I'll let Jason Breida handle that stuff here at the end of the month whenever he debates over that topic. So we'll just jump right in here. Let me know sound-wise if this is coming through okay.
That want to deal with again. And people say, why bother? Again, it's not that provisionism is all that big of a thing. I mean, the whole idea of we've come up with a new movement. Actually, we're just synergists, and we're just not nearly as deeply rooted in history as the other synergists came before.
Yeah, we only hold to the same anthropology as the first 400 years of the Christian church, and we only hold to the view of salvation held by most Christians throughout all of Christian history. But those guys just brand new. They're new kids on the block.
But they're teachable moments. They're opportunities to go, here is another misrepresentation, and it almost always is, and here's how you respond to it. So the one that I saw, this now says 14 hours. Again, algorithms are algorithms. They are...
Let me touch on just real quick the accusation of misrepresentation. You get that a lot. When someone says, you've misrepresented me, always ask them, okay, what did I say specifically that was a misrepresentation of all forms of the Calvinistic dogma? Because there are different kinds of Calvinists. The John Piper kind of Calvinist might be different than the John MacArthur kind of Calvinist on one point or another. Obviously, the James White kind of Calvinist is a little different than the Phil Johnson kind of Calvinist, for example. They have differing views of infant salvation, apparently. And so you can't represent the whole swath of the entire Calvinistic world in one video or in one broadcast or one quote by any means. And so ask them, okay, specifically quote my actual words in context and tell me why it's misrepresentative of the whole of Calvinistic theology. And remember, just because I say something that's not palatable doesn't mean it's an error. In other words, just because I'm not saying it exactly with exact verbiage or tone that you would say it in, it doesn't mean it's not representative or it's not true. And so there's different ways in which you can describe something that may seem less palatable, because obviously I disagree with the system. So I'm not going to necessarily put it in palatable ways. I'm going to put it in a very clear way. And sometimes when you're too clear with determinism or too clear with Calvinism, Calvinists accuse you of misrepresenting them, when in reality, you're just stating their doctrine too clear in such a way that people can understand what it actually means so as to reject it. And you'll see a lot of that where people are you're misrepresenting what I believe, when in reality, I've represented exactly what you believe in such a clear way that people see it for what it is, just like we're doing right now with the infant damnation situation. That we're making Dr. White's view very, very clear to the world. And he doesn't like it because a lot of people on his side don't agree with him on it. And so what does he need to do? Obfuscate. Try to make it something, red herring here, red herring there, Leighton's this, Leighton's that. Warren's a cult leader, and all whatever he has to do is throw whatever he can. Don't look at behind the curtain at the infant damnation thing, because that's what's going on here. And again, when somebody asks you or tells you you're misrepresenting me, don't just dismiss them, because you might be misrepresenting their form of Calvinism. So you need to hear them out to find out whether you're representing their form of Calvinism or not. Because if you're coming at them and saying, you shouldn't believe in infant damnation, and they don't believe in infant damnation, and they're saying, well, you're misrepresenting me. I don't believe in that. Then you need to hear them out, guys. Don't just assume that every Calvinist is exactly like James White, because they're not. Okay, so you need to hear them out. I'm saying you need to say, I understand, before you say I disagree. So hear out the person, find out what it is they're claiming you're misrepresenting their form of Calvinism on. And ask for a quote or ask for an example or help them to understand. And then you could say, oh, okay, I wasn't talking about your form of Calvinism. Just like when Warren in that original quote, he wasn't talking about, John MacArthur's form of Calvinism. He was talking about those who are willing to align themselves with this infant damnation concept, willing to sacrifice their own child, or willing to believe in a God who would sacrifice their own child or punish their own child in eternity for something they have absolutely no control over. That's what he was addressing in that particular situation, at least. All right, moving on.
Very mysterious. If Calvinism were true, so there's a video. I'm not going to put the video up, but you can find it yourself. There's a video where this father, he has 3 kids. They all look the same age. In fact, they look like they may be triplets. And he has them sitting there. Their eyes are closed. And he has, I don't know if it's a burrito or just what it is, but 2 of the kids, there's nothing on their plate when they open their eyes. And the other one has 3 burritos on their plate.
Okay. I thought y'all should see it. One, I didn't think this is a big deal. I thought it was just kind of cute and funny. See if I can make this bigger where y'all can see it. Let me see. Wait. Won't let me. Can y'all even? Oh, okay, wait. Share this tab instead. Okay, y'all. Let's see if we can watch this. The father puts the burritos in front. I don't know if they're burritos, what they are. They're all in front of one kid. And the kid on the one side's crying. Watch. Isn't that cute? It's just a heartwarming little video. The kid, Of course, I'm kind of even, I think, put a little smiley face or something, or at least I intended to. I don't know if I did or not, but it was just a kind of a funny video that I was putting up there to show. I stopped sharing it there. Let me put him back in here. I need a producer. I got to find all this stuff myself. Okay, there it is. Let's see. Oh, I got to go back down here and do this. Share screen. But anyway, he gets, kind of upset about this, and I get it. I mean, I'm defending, or I'm trying to promote. I'm doing exactly what a lot of Calvinists do, and promoting our systematic. I'm promoting the way we look at God and life, and so I had made a comment on there that, well, he's gonna read the comment, so we'll just go with we'll let him tell you the rest of the story here.
Plate. One of them starts crying. The other one's going, "What's going on?" And the one in the middle gives one burrito to one to the other. Okay, it's cute. Dad's seeing if he's training them to share and stuff like that. Very human. Pluck at the heartstrings, human type thing. Okay, so if Calvinism were true, Provisionists would have the heart of the kid in the middle who gave one of each to the people, all the while wondering why we are more benevolent than our Father.
Okay, so that's what I said, and what I was trying to represent is that our motivation here is to demonstrate we're not more benevolent than our Father. We don't believe that we're more benevolent than our dad, our Heavenly Father. We think he's more benevolent than us. He loves more than we do. He's more gracious than I am. He's more self-sacrificial and willing to give and help others than I am, okay? And therefore, what I'm trying to say is the heart of a provisionist is trying to say, when a Calvinist comes along and says, this is the way it works, he gives everything to one and to the neglect of the other, our heart is like, oh, well, let me share. What do we do? Why am I more benevolent than the God of Calvinism? That doesn't make any sense. That's the point I'm trying to get at. We're not more benevolent than God, and therefore that's one reason we reject Calvinism, because on Calvinism, Paul in Romans 9:1-3 is more benevolent than God on that Calvinistic reading, because he's willing to self-sacrificially give his salvation up for these hardened Jews, but yet these hardened Jews represent the reprobates on Calvinism's interpretation. So Paul's more benevolent than the God who's inspiring his words. That's why we don't think the Calvinistic reading of Romans 9 fits, because you've got God being less benevolent than Paul on the Calvinistic interpretation of Romans 9. That's our argument. So that's the point that I was trying to get across with that little tweet. And here's his response.
Okay. So once again, what you do is we don't care about God's glory. We don't care about God's holiness.
Do provisionists care about God's glory and God's holiness? Of course we do. So obviously that's false. The question is how does God glorify himself? Is it glorifying? Is the Calvinistic version of God more glorifying than the provisionistic version of God? That's the question. Which view truly glorifies God? I don't believe the view of God on Calvinism is more glorifying than the view of God on Provisionism. I think it's much less. And I make an argument for that, which we'll get to.
We don't care about theodicy. We don't care about, even though Paul says God's going to be...
Do we care about theodicy? Does C.S. Lewis care about theodicy? Go read The Problem of Pain, one of the best books on theodicy that I've ever read. Think about all the apologists who are the provisionist apologists, the Arminian apologists. Every one of them have a defense of God's goodness in light of evil and suffering and sin and pain. Even R.C. Sproul, a classical approach apologist, who uses, in one argument at least that we found online, the same defense for theodicy that a free will advocate uses. Inconsistently, I thought, but nevertheless, he makes the same basic arguments in that particular video that William Lane Craig would make, for example. So do we care about theodicy? Of course we do. Again, this is not steel-manning your opponent. This is straw-manning your opponent. This is making your opponent look like, oh, they just don't even have a theodicy. They don't care about God's glory. Listen, would you say that about Michael Brown? Because Michael Brown and I, as far as I know, have the exact same view on infants, on this issue, on how, now maybe he would represent himself differently than I would on some points, fine. But would you say the same things you were just saying right there? Oh, Michael Brown doesn't have a theodicy. Michael Brown doesn't care about God's glory. Of course you wouldn't, because you're reasonable with Michael Brown when it comes to these issues. So why not be reasonable with anyone who disagrees with you on the issues? Be consistent with that.
Be justified in ways. Doesn't matter. It's all about man. It's all about the creature. What you Calvinists and your focus upon God's holiness and glory and eternal purposes and it's all about man. It's all about us, man. Don't worry about other stuff. And so we are more benevolent than our Father. Now think about this for just a moment, because again, if Leighton was ever reformed, he'd know this, but has evidently forgotten stuff in that time period. It happens. It's convert syndrome. I've seen it many, many times.
If White was really an Arminian, he would know how an Arminian would answer every single argument he's brought up against Arminianism. So because he continues to bring those arguments against Arminianism proves that he wasn't really an Arminian. See, we both can do that. Matter of fact, I'm considering in the debate starting every response to every question he asks me, every point he makes. I'm really considering starting by saying, well, if you were really an Arminian before, you would know this, because he claims to have once been a synergist, an Arminian. And so I'm going to start every answer to every question. Well, if you were truly an Arminian, you would know this, and then go on and answer the question. Y'all dare me? You think I should do that? Or that would be sinking to his level. It's really tempting, but it's just surely people who are not Kool-Aid drinking see through that kind of argumentation.
We're talking about, well, let's talk about something that's super, super important. The eternal covenant of redemption, the pactum salutis. This is something that honestly, in some forms of biblically bereft classical theology, how's that? People who get so enamored with the framework that they forget that what enlivens and makes classical theology important and worthwhile is its intimate connection to Scripture. The first time I ever taught on the attributes of God for Alpha and Omega Ministries. I'm not sure if you were there, if that was before you, if that already existed by the time you came along. That was already up there. Okay. We already had the cassette tape. we had the cassette tape on the Ghetto Blaster that we could duplicate. Yes, that was... Man, we're getting old. 5 years from when we... Okay, all right. So probably about 2 years before you came along, I recorded a seminar on the attributes of God. Okay, I'm a young seminary type guy, and young seminary type guys just get all excited about this kind of stuff, as well they should. But even at that point in time, even though I did have quotes from someone like a Burkhoff or something like that, the focus was Scripture. The focus, I recognized from the start that if you want Christ's sheep to be passionately involved in something, to believe something with passion that's going to last their whole life, you ground them in the Scriptures. Everything you ground them in outside the Scriptures can come and go. Ground them in the Scriptures, and they'll stay grounded. That's how the Spirit works. And so we ground people in those Scriptures. And those Scriptures...
So does Michael Brown. So do I. So does every provisionist that I know. We ground people in the Scriptures. The question is, how do you interpret particular passages within the Scriptures? And we have differences of opinion, obviously, on that.
Reveal to us that these beautiful doctrines that are related to one another. And the reality is that when we talk about the attributes of God, we talk about all the beautiful interconnectedness of Christian theology. When we talk about God's purposes, we talk about the Father, the Son, the Spirit. Like I said, I'm really concerned that some of these people, there is great beauty in recognizing, in allowing the Scriptures to reveal to us the beauty of the relationship of the divine persons. Now, if you and some post-Nicene theologians got to this point, all right, they got to this point, and if you think that you just have to slavishly follow every post-Nicene theologian, I'll just point you to Calvin, who didn't. He was willing to correct based on Scripture. And emphases, things like that. Not just throw the whole thing out, but to go, not really. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, And so, anyway, when you get to the point, as some post-Nicene theologians did, to where the divine persons, their reality of existence is limited to one part of the divine mind contemplating another part of the divine mind. Okay, just don't look me in the eye and say that's what the apostles believe. Just don't look at me in the eye and say that even if you explained your position to the apostles, they'd go, "Oh yeah. That's where we're coming from." No.
Just so you know, I almost edited out this section, but I was afraid of, oh, you didn't play me in my full context, kind of thing. And plus, I didn't, because of my situation this morning, I didn't have time to go through and do my edit like I was planning on doing. But yeah, as many of you are already noting on the side chat, this has absolutely nothing to do with anything I said, and much to do with anything we would disagree on, which is often the case with White's replies. They're little red herrings, or his divergence off rabbit trails that have nothing to do with the point of contention are pretty par for the course.
I don't believe it. One of the things that I have loved for so long is to think about the condescension, love, and yet desire for self-glorification that is seen in the roles played by Father, Son, and Spirit in bringing about redemption. Each divine person is taking a different role. And if that's just one thought bouncing off another thought and the two together make a third thought or something, wow, forget that. That's not what the New Testament teaches. That's not how anyone reading the New Testament would go, oh yeah, I think that's what the author has intended us to believe.
Maybe he's about to have a debate over the Trinity, and these are things he's thinking through with the triune nature of God or something. I have no idea how any of that relates to what I said. I'm just trying to guess as to where he's going with this.
So that eternal covenant of redemption is to simply be washed away by the focus upon the creature. The focus upon the creature.
Who focuses on the creature? God does. Why? Because they deserve it? No. Because he's good and loving and gracious and kind. And that focus of God on others who are undeserving is what makes him so glorious, which we'll get to. What White ultimately argues is that the reason God helps us is to glorify himself. In other words, it's a quid pro quo for God. I'm doing this for you, but only because I myself am looking to seek my own glory. It's really about me self-seeking my own glory is really what I'm looking for. It's really about being God-centered, meaning what God-centered means is that God is centered on God, not on us. And therefore that makes God more glorious. And I say that does just the opposite, because what you've done is made God look like a selfish man. Because what do selfish men do? Selfish men do things for other people in order to get recognized, in order to get credit, in order to get glory, in order to get praise. That's what selfish men do. Selfish men help others for their own good. Oh, if I do that for so-and-so, then maybe I'll get a raise because that person's related to that person. I'll get a raise if I help them do this. And so I'm going to go help them do this because I want to get something from them by doing it. They're not being selfless when they do that. That's what a man does. That's what sinful humanity does. And that's the attribute they're putting onto God. The reason God does this for you, the reason God does what he does for humanity is really, it's all about his own self-glorification. We're going to get into that. Let me unpack it all the way to the end before you bring judgment, because we're not trying to say that God is not attempting to demonstrate and to reveal himself as glorious. We do believe that, but we believe that he's doing that by a different means and for a different reason than the Calvinist does, as we will spell out in a minute.
And so, wondering why we are more benevolent than our Father, the Son takes on human flesh to redeem rebel sinners. See, I don't believe that Provisionism has any room for a biblical anthropology and especially a biblical doctrine of federal headship. It's just not there.
Let me interpret. They don't have any room for biblical anthropology. Let me interpret that mean. That means they don't have any room for total inability, meaning everybody's born by divine decree, by default, unable to respond positively to God. They don't have a room for that, which he's right. We don't have room for that because it's not in the Bible, as far as we can tell. And that would remove human blameworthiness. What better excuse is there than I was born unable to believe because God by default created me this way? Yeah, that's not in the Bible. Yeah, we agree with that. That's what he means by the word biblical anthropology, i.e., Calvinistic anthropology, meaning men don't have any responsibility from birth because of the way God created them. And then federal headship. What's he talking about there? Federal headship is code word for inherited guilt, infants that are damned, those kinds of things that come from that doctrine. It's basically what he's arguing for. Everybody's born guilty because of what Adam did. And it's not an accident. Okay. It's not like God goes, oops, man, I didn't want everybody to get guilty. No, this is a decree of God. God decreed not only that Adam would sin, according to Calvin, and most Calvinists agree that all things come about by the divine decree, which would include Adam sinning. So God decrees for Adam to sin, and also decrees the result of that sin was that everyone would be born unable to repent of their sin willingly, to respond positively to his appeals to be reconciled. In other words, for reasons completely beyond their control, they are in this condition. Okay. That's what he means by the federal headship. So if you're saying we don't have room for those two doctrines in our theology, ding, ding, you're right. But spell that out, please. When you use just big words like, hey, they don't have any room for biblical anthropology. Well, that's begging the question. We both have what we believe is a biblical anthropology, but we have a different biblical anthropology. Just like you and Zwingli have a different biblical anthropology. Like you and Millard Erickson have a different biblical anthropology. Like apparently you and John MacArthur have a different biblical anthropology because of where you land with regard to what happens to infants when they die. And so all of us believe we have a biblical anthropology. The question is, what does the Bible actually teach and how should we interpret it? And if one interpretation makes God look inconceivable, like yours does, then maybe you should reconsider your interpretation.
It's just not there. They don't believe it. They believe in the fundamental goodness of man.
Have I ever said I believe in the fundamental goodness of man? No, I believe we're born in the image of God because he created us that way with a conscience, because the Bible tells us we have a conscience, the law written on our heart. But I have talked about many times how we're born in a fallen world, that we have inclinations towards evil and selfishness, but I don't believe inclinations are determinative. Just because I may be inclined to being hot-tempered, or I might be inclined toward a particular proclivity or sin or selfishness, doesn't mean I have to act in accordance with that proclivity or that inclination, because I don't believe desires are determinative. I believe agents are determinative. Agents make their determinations, and we choose from among a host of different desires to act upon. So if I act to fulfill this desire, it's not because the desire itself was some kind of instinctive, irresistible, determinative factor that I couldn't resist it. Like an animal instinct just reflexively does what it's created to do because it's instinctive. No, we're moral beings, and we choose to act on which of the desires we're going to fulfill. Therefore, we're held responsible for what choices we make, because we're actually free to make different choices and act on different desires. And that's what separates us from the animals. And so I believe differently than you do with regard to human responsibility and human culpability based upon that responsibility.
And they act that way, and they reason that way. Very, very clear. And so the condescension, the love demonstrated by Father, Son, and Spirit in redemption is washed away. Washed away. You never know.
Yeah, he's checking his phone now for some reason.
Okay. Actually, some from Apology, which I appreciate that. Anyway, so there's that one. Then more on the absurdity of Baalgate. Once again, we have constant proof being offered to us that the people who have been rejecting Reformed theology don't know diddly about it, because it seems that most of these people had never read the London Baptist Confession of Faith or the Westminster Confession of Faith.
So ironic that he says that. Warren put out a video with the London Baptist Confession of Faith or the Westminster. I'm not sure which one. Both of them, one's a copy of another, so they're basically the same things for the most part. Warren put it on the screen and demonstrated it, and I think he even has one, and it says the same thing we're saying White says. It says there are elect infants, and then the next thing, and then those who are not elect. What does that imply? That there are some elect infants and some who are not elect. Now, he says it's vague enough that people can take it either way. Okay, so which way do you take it, James White? We already know which way you take it because you already told us which way you take
elect
it.
Infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on. There are others who will not be. And I don't. There are others who will not be. And I. There are others who will not be. And I don't. There are others who will not be. And I.
Does that need to get any more clear, ladies and gentlemen? There are others who will not be. What does that mean? Now, he can say, maybe I misspoke. Fine. Come out and say, I misspoke. I don't really believe there are some non-elect infants out there. I shouldn't have said it that way. Sometimes we do that. I've come on and said, no, I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have said it this way because it's more clear. Fine. Be clear about it. That's great. I'm trying to represent you with your own words. And in this particular video where you're asked the question, what about infants that die? That was the question being posed. And he even quotes from John Owen, who holds to the same kind of perspective that there will be infants that are damned, because John Owen is more consistent in his high Calvinism. He's the one who holds to more of a limited atonement perspective against Hodge and some of the other Princeton theologians. And so he's a higher Calvinist. And the guy that asked you the questions asking about a quote from John Owen in support of infant damnation. And here's how you're answering him. And so what better video is there in context than one where you're being asked the very question that we're debating over?
I never thought through what it says. And so their big thing again now. So now remember, I just want to remind everybody, this all started with one guy. There were 3 guys on the video, and one guy decided to say that that Reformed parents have the attitude of Moloch worshipers, who are willing to throw their children on the fire as long as they get in, as long as they get theirs, they get their salvation, then they can throw their children on the fire. Everything will go well. This absurdity, again, that man didn't have any credibility then, and now he's in about as...
Okay. As I've said before, I understand how someone might take it that way, given the clip that was put on Twitter. But it was very clearly laid out by Warren and myself and others what was the intention behind his quote. Okay. So what do good Christian brothers do? Good Christian brothers, if somebody offends you by something they say, and then they come back and go, oh, no, I see how you took it that way, but that's not what I was meaning. Here's what I meant. And then you still just go, oh, but I want to be mad and I'm not going to listen to what you say. And now I'm just going to continue to cancel culture you and not listen to your explanation. That's not Christian behavior. Christian behavior is, oh, okay, I see what you meant. You didn't put it very well, or maybe you weren't very clear, but I see what you were talking about, as I already explained earlier in the program, what Warren, I believe, was talking about and how he explained what he was talking about with regard to Calvinists who are willing to adopt the mindset of infant damnation and that concept, are willing to live within that framework and still worship a God they believe would do that, which is a sharing of a mindset with those in the pagan culture who would be willing to sacrifice their own children and still worship whatever deity that is. That is a shared mindset. That is not an accusation that every Reformed or Calvinistic parent is willing to sacrifice their own child or doesn't care about their own child or whatever that you took that to mean. That's not what he was intending to say. So, and it's especially obvious that's not what he's intending to say because he was a Reformed parent. And so he didn't believe that about his kids. And what's interesting about that, and I loved what Warren said about this in reply to that, he was going, he said, I don't even believe the pagans who were sacrificing their babies had no care or no love for their children. Surely it was horrible for them to do that. They had probably a huge amount of angst and being upset, but they were willing to swallow that pill and do that horrible thing because they believed that about their deity. They were willing to do that horrible, inconceivable thing because they believed something about their deity that was false. That's the point. And that's the point he was trying to get to, is how would anybody come to that inconceivable conclusion? How would you do that? That's the point he was trying to get to. And again, the fact that White won't listen, he blocks everybody who sends anything from Warren to him. He's not willing to listen to the other side. He's not willing to listen to what Warren told him. So he's not being a good faith interlocutor, being willing to listen to, oh, okay, I see what you meant by that. Now let's engage with what you meant. Instead, no, let's continue to paint him as saying something he never did say, nor did he mean, in order to make him be the bad guy so I can take pressure off myself for promoting infant damnation.
Not as much the same deficit spending situation with credibility as the United States government. And that's a lot, really is. He got rightly destroyed by everybody, Arminians and everybody else, for such absurdity. Okay, rightly destroyed. So what do? They decided to cover it up by creating Baalgate, which is not about how Reformed parents think about their children. It's not about the lie that, oh, hey, as long as I get mine, I don't care what happens to them. That absurd.
Okay, this is a rewriting of history, just so you know. We didn't create this. This Calvinists created this. Okay, you remember on Twitter what happened was we got the backlash after the video came out, and we're like, oh, that was taken wrong. That's not the way it was meant to be taken. That's not what we were saying. And so we got on a video and explained this is what Warren was addressing. This is what was in his mind. And he was talking about his own family upbringing and the high view of Calvinism they held to, and the concept of infant damnation, and willing to accept this concept of infant damnation and how that works and all that plays within that. And it was in that context that he was saying that. And then people responding to the video that White apparently deletes and never watches, other Calvinists who actually do watch some of our stuff were replying by saying, there's no Calvinist who believes in infant damnation. So what's the big deal here, buddy? Who are you responding to, Warren? None of us believe that. Look what John Piper says. Look what all our leaders say. Obviously, we don't believe that. And then we go, no, actually, James White believes this. And there are other Calvinists online. There's some Twitter handles here that obviously believe in some form of, some infants that aren't elect and that are damned. So we're not misrepresenting all forms of Calvinism here. Look, here's a clip from James White right here. It changed from 1987, but yeah, he holds to this inconceivable concept. That's where this all came from. It came from the moderate Calvinist out there screaming at us saying, there's no such thing as any Calvinist who believes that infants are damned. That's what created this. Not Leighton Flowers or Warren McGrew or Jordan Hatfield. None of us created that. Calvinist online coming against us, speaking out against infant damnation is what caused this, not us.
Absurdity. We're just going to try to forget that was there. And now let's go after infant damnation. Not seemingly even knowing what the confessional position was. And again, these folks, they're not really a part of this conversation, but the serious people that produced the Westminster Confession of Faith. And I disagree with portions of the Westminster. They're relatively small portions, but I do disagree with portions of Westminster. And I do so recognizing historical backgrounds and all that kind of fun stuff. And
all right, before we move on, let me catch you up on some of the Twitter exchange, just so you can kind of see where some of this is he's coming from on some of this. Let me share this tab here. This is from Whitebeard. That's James White there. He says, there was some post that put his picture on and I think that was the Provisionist Perspective guys put a picture of that, and they say this is the face you make when you realize you accidentally told everyone that you believe some infants are damned by Allgate. And notice James White doesn't deal with that portion right there, that you believe some infants are damned. Okay, he doesn't. He just ignores that. That's a red herring. We get off that issue. Actually, that's the look. This is White replying to that. Actually, that's the look you give when you realize there are people so bereft of serious purpose in life. So there's the personal attack. So Provisionist Perspective and the rest of us, apparently, we are bereft of serious purpose in life, apparently. So personal attack. They will create a faux controversy. So again, he's doing just like he's doing in the broadcast. We're the one creating this controversy, not the moderate Calvinist online that believe like MacArthur do, that say, like Namer did, no, James White and all of our heroes, they believe every infant will be elect and saved. And that's what created this controversy, not us, just to be clear. Over the confessional statements adopted in the 17th century. But obviously those same people are so shallow in their reading and understanding that they didn't even know it until a wild-eyed slandered spewer, I guess that's Warren, decided to lie about all Reformed parents, saying they don't care about whether their children are elect or not, as long as they get themselves into and get theirs. Just it's basically the same misrepresentation he just gave. And so he's accusing myself and Warren and others of not knowing what the confessions say. The same confession that we read supporting your view, the middle ground that there are elect infants and then some who are not elect. That view. Let me remind everybody what that view is in case you forgot.
I don't. And there are others who will not be. And I don't know infants. and then there are others who will not. He's going to have elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of all the rest of us. As a
Okay, so yeah, there's Warren in the side chat right there. James is attacking his own audience and he doesn't realize it. That's exactly right. Just like he didn't realize he'd liked Namer PB, whatever his name was, guy he works with, likes his tweet and thanks him in a tweet, says thank you for defending, and he's liking a tweet where Namer is arguing that James White still today holds to the same position he did in 1987, which James White has said he does not anymore. Okay, again, I don't know how to be more clear about this. All right, and so shallow when they're reading. So who's really shallow when they're reading? That's the big question here. When utterly refuted for their lie, the liar he is. Again, I've not. What lie has he told? Well, what you thought he said in that original tweet is the quote unquote lie, which has been cleared up, but you won't watch any of the videos where he clears up his intentions, because you said earlier in the same video that you always delete anybody who sends you any videos from this man because he's a liar. So what he said sounded like a lie, even though later he explains this is what he meant by it, and it's not a lie based upon what he meant by it. But I'm not going to listen to his explanation of that. I'm going to continue to call him a liar based upon what I interpreted him to mean, even though that's not what he meant. That's basically what we got here. Again, he's not a good faith interlocutor, if you haven't noticed yet. He decided to cover his tracks by producing this absurd faux controversy with the willing assistance of a small cadre, I don't know what, cadre. I got to get up my thesaurus. Loudmouths. That's me. I'm the loudmouth, and I do have a loud mouth. I have to admit that one. That's always been the case. Who hate God's sovereignty so much that they will join into any mob that is denouncing it. Now, obviously, we don't hate God's sovereignty. And let me clarify. There's my answer to him. Dr. White, once again, allow me to correct some false perceptions. One, the controversy over infant damnation was created by online Calvinists who, in response to Warren's explanation that he was specifically talking about infant damnation or had infant damnation in mind, were insisting no modern day Calvinist believes infants are damned. So your continual adherence to an old confession that has been long abandoned by the likes of MacArthur, Piper, Steve Lawson et al. Goes to prove our point that the type of Calvinism that still inconceivably affirms God damns some infants who die, i.e. the non-elect ones, is alive and well. So thank you for helping us out with establishing the very point that we were contending with on that day. We hope you will likewise abandon that horrendous view, like Piper and MacArthur and others have done. Point two, we knew you and some older high Calvinists, along with your confessions, affirmed that God may not elect to save all infants who die, as we played you in your own words saying exactly that over and over and over again, proving that to the Calvinists who were trying to deny it. Okay? What makes you think we didn't already know that? You need to talk to Namer. Okay? You need to inform Namer, because he's the one who didn't know it. We knew it. Okay? Just be clear. We're the ones who were defending what you actually believe. Namer was saying, no, you still believe 1987 view. That's what the facts of the matter are. Point three, Warren did not say all Reformed parents don't care whether or not their children are elect. He didn't even say that the pagan parents who sacrificed their children didn't care about their children. You misunderstood his point, which he and others have made abundantly clear in many ways now. It would be a lie to suggest that was the message he was intending to communicate when clearly it was not. Anyone who knows Warren personally would know that, which is why I didn't take what he said in the way that you did. Now, let me pause right there. White got onto me pretty hard for not stopping Warren immediately after saying what he thought he was saying. And granted, if I would have thought Warren was communicating that all Reformed people hate their infants and don't care about them, are willing to sacrifice them, and as long as they get elect, and it doesn't matter. If that's what I took him to mean, I would have said, wait a second, what are you talking about? That may be a little harsh. Anybody ask Warren how many times when we've had programs, when we've talked before, where I've stopped him along the way, and I said, no, wait, now be fair here. Let's say this, and I've even clarified some of it he said. And he's acknowledged, yeah, I can be a little bit hard on that point. In other words, I'm not afraid to call my guest out or warn specifically. He's a friend of mine. I'm not afraid to call him out and say, no, I would say it this way, or I would soften it this way. And so I would have called him out if I thought that's what he was saying, but I didn't take it that way in the context of our 3-hour discussion. I knew what he was referring to. And so that's the point. I go on to say, you said you refused to watch any of the follow-up videos in which Warren clarified his intentions. So your continued spreading of this false information is on you. That's not on Warren or the small cadre of loudmouths. Point 4, we love God's sovereignty because we know it does not mean determinism. So we're fine with sovereignty, by the way. It means God has the right to rule as he pleases. That's what sovereignty is. God does what he wants. He can do whatever he wants to. And according to the nature of God, as I see revealed in Scripture, he is not pleased to damn any infant who dies. That's the nature of God that we see. It's apparently the nature of God that MacArthur and Piper and other Calvinists, modern-day Calvinists, see, but White does not. And that's where we're contending with him. We don't believe he views God rightly. And that's why we are contending with that particular point, just to be abundantly clear about that. I just realized I did not switch over. I was reading this to you. I just realized I don't think y'all were seeing this. This was my reply to him, but you heard it. So most of you listen by audio later anyway. So hopefully that's pretty clear. So let me go back to the video here, and we'll pick up where we left off.
But even when you disagree, you have to recognize the incredible depth of thought and scholarship and reflection and debate. And one of the things that's wonderful about it is that, London's Baptist Confession takes the Westminster and the Savoy and some others and, makes some changes. And look, we can, for example, in the London Baptist Confession, we have the actual assertion of the active and passive obedience of Christ, which is not in the Westminster Confession of Faith. But there are many people who were framers of the Westminster who believed in that. But what they were doing, and I think Baptists need to hear this too, what they were doing is they are trying to provide a summary statement that would have the widest possible means of bringing the Reformed together without excluding people that didn't need to be excluded or including people that didn't need to be included. That's not always an easy line to follow. And you can agree or disagree as to exactly how successful they were. But that's what they were trying to do. And the Presbyterians, something that a Baptists, again, need to hear this, Presbyterians have come, well, not all Presbyterians. Excuse me. A number of Presbyterians, I would say the majority, have come to understand that you have to allow for some variation of interpretation of the Westminster Confession of Faith, or you're going to be standing there all alone. Okay,
let me interpret what he's doing now. Okay. He's now showing that in the Westminster and London Baptist Confession, it is vague enough to include his view, the middle view, which says that some infants are elect and others are not. And it's also vague enough, in other words, wide enough, more of an umbrella kind of statement, that it includes people like MacArthur. And so both the MacArthur view and the White view can be included within the confession. Okay. Which part? Which point? What does that have anything to do with our contention with the fact that you take the view that there are infants that are damned? That's what we're saying. What we're saying is that, yes, while the confession may allow for both MacArthur's view and your view to fit in it, it still doesn't give a defense for your view opposed to MacArthur's, does it? So what are you arguing here, White? That your confession supports your view and MacArthur's view? Okay. So now why don't you defend your view that some infants are damned?
If you demand, cross the T's, dot the I's, just like I do, type of thinking, you're not going to have a denomination. You're not going to have a church. You're not going to be able to cooperate together to accomplish things. And so
And if you teach your view of the fact that some infants are elect and others are not very clearly and distinctly from that of MacArthur and other Calvinists, you're not going to have a church for very long, because anybody who hasn't surrendered their sense-making completely will see your view of God as inconceivable and walk out your door, which is why I think you're red herring this issue.
chapter 10, paragraph 3, which speaks of elect infants, is written in such a way as to allow a range of understanding. You could believe, if you wanted to, that all infants are elect. And there are people who believe that.
And he's not one of them.
You can believe that there are only certain infants that are elect, or that a small number of infants are elect. It doesn't say. That's how you especially deal with a subject like that, where, and this is the reality, where we don't have biblical revelation.
Baloney. That is untrue. We have a lot of biblical revelation. We have as much biblical revelation to support the concept and idea that God wouldn't damn an infant that we do to support the triune nature of God and so many of the other doctrines that we hold dear as Baptists or as just Christians in general. That is just a bunch of bull harky. I don't. Okay, calm down, Leighton. Calm down. To say that we don't have enough biblical revelation to support the idea and the concept that our God's character and his goodness is such that he would save an infant that's aborted? Are you kidding me?
What we're doing, and this is where we will never, there is no reason to even talk to people who don't believe in Romans chapter 5, who don't believe in Ephesians chapter 1, and don't believe in John chapter 6, or have perverted.
Or have a different interpretation than you do of those, including within your own Reformed tradition, who have a different interpretation?
Silly, upside down, I'm going to stand on my head and spin in circles ways of trying to get around the sovereignty of God. We're not in the same group. We're not talking with you. Amongst the Reformed who believe sola scriptura and tota scriptura and practice these things, then there is a limited amount of information. And so the way it's expressed is meant to allow for differing viewpoints without causing division. But what it does require you to do is take...
Doesn't cause division? Doesn't cause... One group of people teaching some babies are damned to go to hell and others are not doesn't cause division from those who say, no, God's character is such that he would save any baby who dies? Of course that would cause division. Anybody who has a child that's lost, that loses a child or anything like that, you're in a pastoral situation. If you've got a group of people in the church who are teaching one doctrine, they might be elected, they may not. I mean, we have testimony of people who, because of this Bellgate thing, who've written to us. I know Warren's got several of them that he's talked about, where he's got testimony of people who are told this in higher Calvinistic churches, that we can't really comfort you by saying that for sure. Just the same thing that you heard Calvinists before, high Calvinists, who will say things like, well, you shouldn't tell a crowd of people that Jesus loves them all. Why? Because some of them may not be elect. And they use the same logic and the same reasoning to basically say, you don't want to tell somebody that their baby is certainly going to be saved because you don't know if they're really saved or not. You don't want to lie to them. And so you just need to, kind of hedge it a little bit. They could be elect, they may be saved. We can hope that maybe God elected them, but we don't know based upon the revelation of Scripture. That is not a good biblical way to bring comfort and guidance to people who have lost a child. Because I think the Bible is abundantly clear about what happens to infants that die. If you Google this, not only does Dr. MacArthur and Piper and Steve Lawson and Todd Friel and James Dabney, I know Charles Hodge, these are the ones I've just read this week. They give a biblical defense and they list dozens of verses to support this concept. Does White deal with any of those? No. He just said, no, there's no biblical support for this whatsoever. You just threw out your own Reformed tradition of these people who've defended infant salvation for decades. And all of the biblical defense they've given for it. They don't have any biblical defense. They just don't care about, they don't even read Romans 5. They just don't care about it. You don't think John MacArthur read Romans 5? You don't think John Piper knows what Romans 5 is? They even hold to the same basic tenets that you do on Calvinism. But they take a different view with regard to how that applies to infants and why God would not damn an infant. And yet, why won't you deal with that, Dr. White?
Take seriously the federal headship of Adam. Because if anyone is saved who is in Adam, it is by grace.
And not a single Calvinist who is arguing, or even a provisionist for that matter, who is arguing for the universal salvation of infants who die, is saying we're saved by any other way but grace. Just because we're not being saved from a moral sin because they haven't committed any moral sins doesn't mean they don't need to be saved from death and suffering and the fallen world that they're born into. They still need to be saved, but not from mortal sin because they haven't committed a sin. And so they're not being saved from sin. They're being saved from death, mortality, the curse of sin within this world, and the inevitability of all the consequences that come from that. But babies don't need to be saved from their sins because they haven't sinned yet, on our view. And that seems to be basically what MacArthur argues in his point, basically what Piper's arguing in his point with regard to natural revelation and using Romans 1:20 for his perspective. And so why White won't just engage with those arguments or dismisses us all as, they just don't believe that God's grace is what is required to save them. It's such a shallow way of handling a very important and very in-depth issue. And yet he, ironically, and really it's not irony, it's hypocrisy, he's accusing us of not knowing the issues. Who's doing the research here? Who's showing you what all the other Calvinists are teaching biblically and all the verses that come with that? And who's just throwing a hand waving and acting as if they can't even watch these videos?
Must be by grace. Can only be by grace. And it safeguards the freedom of God. And I've said this, we've documented now from the beginning, God has just as much freedom in the salvation of infants as he does in adults. So,
which means what? Infants can be elect or not elect, just like adults can be elect or not elect. What happens to not elect adults? They die and spend eternity in hell, separated from God. Then what would you conclude happens to non-elect infants? Same thing. So deal with it. Deal with that doctrine.
It's not a controversy. It has, this was, you can go back. You don't want to go back into the early church because it's been a controversy back then. And a lot of the answers you're not going to want. The vast majority of them had nothing to do with all babies go to heaven. In fact, the development of infant baptism was part of all of that, despite what Ken Wilson's utter confusion is on that matter. Just so far off the map on that one, it's not even funny. But that, I just thought about that. That might be causing some of the confusion with these guys, if they actually believe what he says about infant baptism and Augustine and stuff like that, because he's just totally off on that. So maybe that is a part of it. I don't know. You raised your...
I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail.
Microphone, so...
Yeah, it struck me when I read the Westminster there, and I'm trying to sort out what Leighton is saying.
Oh, that's the London Baptist too. They're identical.
Right, yes. As I read them, it's like, but wait a minute, guys, you don't understand.
Listen to what Rich is saying here, because this is really revealing, because I don't know that Rich is really following the controversy, at least based upon what he's saying here, because what you're going to hear him talk about is elect means saved. And so it's almost like Rich is saying, look at what the confessions say. It calls them elect infants. Therefore, that means they're saved infants. And it seems, again, maybe I'm not understanding, I'm admitting I may not be understanding Rich here, but it sounds like he's supporting Namer's original claim that White is believing that all infants are elect, meaning all infants are saved. And it seems like that's what Rich is trying to jump in here and basically say, the confessions say they're elect infants, that means they're saved. And as if to say, all infants are saved. And listen to what he says and see if you take it the same way I did.
When you speak of someone who is saved, it is utterly improper to not refer to them as being elect. When you speak of the elect, it's improper not to refer to them as being saved. The two concepts go hand to hand together. You can't have one without the other. So when they read this, they're constantly looking for the non-elect. But if you look at number 4, it speaks of others who are not elect. Number 3 does not speak of the not elect. However you want to understand it, whether you agree with it or not, if you're going to apply what's there, the point of calling them elect is because they're saved. The point of calling them saved is that they're elect. I don't understand why that's hard for them.
Doesn't that seem like he's saying because the confession only refers to the elect infants, it doesn't refer to non-elect infants, even though White does. The confession doesn't refer to non-elect infants. Therefore, the people who wrote the confession believe all infants are elect. Therefore, you guys need to relax because, hey, guys, Even our confessions say all infants are elect. Oh, but the guy that I'm working for, that's sitting behind the, the microphone right up there, he actually said this.
Of his to have elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis of elect infants, and then there are others who will not be. And I don't know what basis to put that on other than the same basis.
Do we need to keep playing that over and over again, Rich? Because your boss says there are elect and non-elect infants. What does that mean? It means he fits within the range of the way in which the London Baptist Confession can be interpreted. Nobody's disputing that. But will he defend his view that some infants are not elect and thus damned, like adults who are damned? That's yet to be discovered, because I haven't heard a defense of that view yet.
Yeah.
Well, and the most important part of it is that this has to be taken, it must be understood as protecting the freedom of God. I was looking for I thought I had it in Dropbox.
As if John Piper doesn't believe God's free. No, nobody's saying God can't do something. We're talking about what God would choose to do based upon the character he's revealed. That we're not debating on what he's free to do or what he's capable of doing. We're debating about what God would do based upon what he's revealed in Scripture. That's it. So this whole God is free to damn infants if he wants to is a canard argument, as you might say, because it's basically saying, well, nobody's saying he's not free to do that. We're saying God wouldn't do that. It's just like saying, I'm free to strangle my daughter the next time I see her. I mean, I'm free to do that. And who are you to question my freedom to do that? Why would you brag about your freedom to strangle your daughter? You would never strangle your daughter, Leighton, because you love your daughter unconditionally, and you would never do that because your character's too good to do something like that to your daughter. And you would rather die yourself than do something like that to your daughter. Why would you ever say that about yourself, Leighton? You would never do that. Of course I wouldn't. That's a horrible, heinous thing to say that I'm free to do. No, I'm not free to do it because my character wouldn't allow me to do something like that. I would fall on my own sword before I would ever do something like that to my daughter because I love her so much, right? That's what we're saying about God. God would never do that to an infant. He's too good. He's too holy. He's too righteous. He's too fair. He's too just. He's too loving. He would never do that to an infant that died.
But I don't have it in Dropbox on my home computer. I was going to read the rest of it. But anyway, it's protecting the freedom of God. And again, you just sit back and go, so y'all are just catching up on what was said almost 400 years ago now? Okay. Well, whatever.
We're just catching up on it. Maybe Namer is just catching up on it. Maybe Rich is just catching up on it. But this is what we've been arguing from the very beginning. And we've been defending the fact that you hold to that view while the swath of Calvinists online saying no one holds to that view anymore, except some weirdos out there. And they forget maybe that you're one of those weirdos that still, I say weirdo, meaning extremes, that hold to this view that some infants are not saved.
nothing like them. All right. So yeah, he said James White rejects the idea that every aborted baby goes to heaven. Again, you have to. There isn't any reason, unfortunately, to talk with these folks because we don't have a common foundation. So the entire theology of God, the entire theology of the triune work of redemption and federal headship and holiness, and come to think of it, sadly, in light of this, I would imagine that when Provisionists, if they watch the debate I did with Shabir Ali in the mosque in Erasmus, South Africa in 2013, wow, coming up on 11 years ago now, wow. As I spoke to those Muslims about how they can have peace with God, I don't think Provisionists would agree with what I said. I don't think they would. They don't have a similar anthropology. That's sad. That is really, really sad. All right, I continue on. A thread developed, which is very, very interesting, about. I don't have the entire thread. I have Leighton's responses, and this was about Judas, and then Namor jumped in and asked about Cyrus.
Namer, that's the guy.
So, someone asked, in light of his rejection of the decree of God, what about Judas? Could Judas have not betrayed Jesus, even though This is the prophecy. Now, stop for a second. Algo knows this. And the various algos from different countries that I used to meet while traveling, who would claim the title of algo for this country and that country and stuff like that, which is sort of cool. Anyway, I'm not sure what happens when algo travels to those countries. I'm not sure if they have a thumb war to see who the real algo is. I don't know. But what debate?
Okay, let me show y'all this so that I'm not lying to you about it. Not that y'all would accuse me of lying. At least some of you would. Maybe not do that. But here's Namer. He was talking about. This is the guy he thanked, and he liked this tweet. Okay, so I want you to see it for yourself. This is a supporter of White. This is the guy, along with those like him, who started this controversy, not us. Okay, let me make it bigger so that you all can see it. Y'all clip this out and put it on Twitter and so that everybody can see this, okay? In 2005, James affirmed his belief in 1987. Now, we know that's false because White's even said so since then. In one of the other, I wish I had the video of it, where he said, yes, in 1987, that's right when I was coming out of, my synergistic views and into Calvinism. And he said, yes, I repeated my old views from my Baptist upbringing about, but I don't hold to that view anymore. I've been consistent the last 40 years of the view he holds now. So Namer is making the error here, okay? And so look what he's saying. In 2005, James affirmed his belief in 1987 and his belief in 2024. So what's Namer arguing? James White's view hasn't changed since 1987. It's exactly the same as it was in 2005, as it is today. And what does that little clip say right there? The most common answer that is offered, and is offered by a lot of wonderful men, and therefore needs to be considered, is every infant who dies in infancy, every child who is murdered in the womb, and that is what it is. We shouldn't sugarcoat it, and we say anything else. Those are elect babies, and they go to heaven. Uric Zwingli, one of the earliest reformers, said that, and he said, I can't prove it from the Bible, and you can't disprove it from the Bible. That is my belief, end quote. Now, if you follow this tweet right here, and you look at the likes right there, I don't know how to show the likes. Can't do it without liking it. I'm sure there's a way to show the likes, but on my other computer, I was able to open up. Somebody's probably yelling at the screen how to do that, but one of those likes right there is James White, because I pulled it up on my other computer. Oh wait, you can maybe do it this way. View post engagements. That's it right there. Okay, that's my engagement with the post. Okay. Anyway, I don't know how to get back to that. I'm not very savvy in Twitter, apparently. But that's White likes that, and he also thanks Namer for his defense. Okay, so Namer is the one who's introducing this concept and idea that James White holds to the same view he had in 1987, that all infants are elect, just like Zwingli held to. White does not believe that. Okay. And that's where the confusion came. That's where this controversial flow out of Bellgate came from Calvinists doing what Namer's doing right here. Us Calvinists, we all believe all infants that die are elect, and that's what James White teaches too. And we go, no. He may have used to teach that, but he doesn't teach it now. And here's some videos to prove that. And here's even the confessional statements that talk about elect infants. So we're the ones who've been saying what you're saying today on your video, James White. Namer and the other Calvinists out there who are the more moderate Calvinists like, Piper and others who don't think you believe that, but you do. And now you won't defend it. And you're getting mad at us for simply defending the way in which we represented what you actually believe. I don't know how to be any more clear about this. So notice he even says, so when Flowers said in this video, White agrees with what he just read from Augustine. That is a very sneaky on Flowers' part. And the truth of the matter is, he did agree with what Augustine said, because Augustine says the same thing. God has the freedom to save some and not others. Babies or otherwise. In other words, Augustine said the exact same thing. And so he's calling me sneaky for doing that, when in reality, that's exactly what White later agrees with. And that's when I said, wait, I just noticed that White liked this tweet. That's baffling. Notice I'm confused by him liking this tweet. Why in the world are you agreeing with Namer here, White? Please let me know if White's still affirming the 2005-87 statements. And what I was told after I put this out there was that the 2005 quote that I just read to you was out of context because Namer sent that to me and I didn't know where the context was from. I don't know where he got it from. And I'm thinking maybe in 2005 he still believed that. That doesn't make any sense. And so what happens? Somebody sent a clip of the 2005, and sure enough, I went and listened to it, and Namer got it wrong. He was actually reading that as one of the options, and then he goes on to say, but that's not the view that I hold to now, and he goes on to defend the same view that we just heard. There are some elect and some not elect. So that's why I said this is baffling. In other words, I'm pushing back on the false information that's being put out there, just to be really clear. In the provisionist spectrum, the silence is sure deafening on questions like these. That's exactly what happens. The people like White and others just ignore that part of it. Let's just red herring, just red herring. We'll throw off whatever we can throw off here and get around that. We don't want to talk about that particular issue. That will get us in trouble with our own if we do this. And so that's why I put up this. I said, so Namer, he posted a 2005 quote from White defending Zwingli's view that all infants will go to heaven, while arguing that this is still White's view today. To my shock, White liked his tweet as if to affirm what he said. And I put the little, scrunchy face there, like, what in the world's going on? So notice, I'm the one who's confused by Namer's quote here, and I'm not understanding why he's doing that, because I know the history. I did my homework. Namer didn't. And White obviously didn't read Namer very well because he liked what he said and thanked him. So is Zwingli's view that all babies will go to heaven extreme or not? Because yesterday White said he doesn't take that extreme view. It's Zwingli's view. Is Zwingli's view sound or not? Because yesterday White said, I cannot provide a sound argument for that view. So I'm trying to figure out, how is 2005 consistent with today? Because he's saying he doesn't believe these things. Okay. And most importantly, does White believe that Zwingli and others who believe like him within the Reformed tradition detest and reject Romans 5? Because that's what he said, remember? He said those who believe in infant salvation of every infant, they detest and reject Romans 5. Do you think Piper detests and rejects Romans 5? Really? I'd love to hear that defense. This is the real reason White doesn't want to debate idol killer Warren on this topic, I think. Inconsistency is a mark of a failed argument. And then that's why I put those two tweets side by side with that below. Now, White jumps in. So notice I'm just reporting what Namer told me, and then White's replying to me after saying what Namer said, the guy that he supports, the guy who works with him, okay? March 7th is going to be a very long night since you seem incapable of recognizing what someone is talking about. So apparently I'm the one incapable of recognizing what someone is talking about, not Namer. Namer's blameless, guys. We can't blame Namer for saying that White holds to the same view as he did in 1987. We've got to blame Leighton for that, I guess. This entire made-up controversy is based upon either utter dishonest, disgusting men throwing cavils at all Reformed folks, or the most silly, childish misrepresentations I've ever seen. Evidently, if I read from Augustine, I believe everything Augustine is saying. Stop right there. Did I ever accuse White of believing everything Augustine says? Nope. Still don't think he believes everything Augustine says, because I know Augustine believes you can lose your salvation. I know Augustine taught that in the baptismal regeneration of infants. White's a Baptist. He didn't believe in baptismal regeneration of infants. I know that. I would never accuse him of believing everything Augustine said. I believe he believed what Augustine said about infant damnation, because right after he read that quote about infant damnation, he said, that's exactly what Romans 9 teaches, and that's exactly what we've been saying. And it's exactly what the quote we just played him saying is ultimately saying too. So I believe you agree with Augustine on the point regarding infants who die and God having every right to damn them if he's free to do so, because that's the argument you've made. If I report Zwingli's view, White says, that I agree with Zwingli about everything, again, canard, red herring. Of course, I've never accused him of believing everything Zwingli says. Says you simply lack the intellectual capacity to utilize context and category. Who's the one who's putting the context on the screen here, folks? Who's the one reading the context, showing the context, bringing the receipts, showing the receipts, bringing it all, laying it all out there, asking you to come on the program and talk about it? Who's being transparent here and who's not? You be the judge. It's astonishing, he says. Yeah, it is astonishing. Since becoming Reformed, I've been quite consistent in where I stand on this issue. I thought so too, but Namer apparently didn't get it. He says, I have addressed it dozens of times in public settings. Yes, and we played them, remember? We're the ones actually using your own words. Namer apparently isn't. He's taking you out of context and saying things that aren't true, and yet you're liking and thanking him inexplicably. I've addressed it dozens of times in public settings. I repeated my stance on the dividing line and here on Twitter within a week. Would you please stop with this nonsense? It's truly embarrassing for you. Again, I think that's maybe a little projecting on his part. I think something is embarrassing for sure, but it's not me. It's what White's been saying. So here I respond to Dr. White. And when I responded this way, it wasn't an insincere apology. I was really trying to figure out where White was coming from because I was still confused based upon the like of Namer's tweet and the reposting of Namer's tweet as if he supported it. I was trying to figure that out. And so I say, I sincerely apologize, Dr. White, if I've misrepresented your view about infants who die. That's not a subject to be taken lightly. So I'd love to hear how I've misrepresented what you've said. I've tried with due diligence to play you in your own words, to let you represent yourself in your own words by painstakingly listening to or reading all the material I could find and then quoting you verbatim, just like I've done in this video. In the most recent clip I could find online, posted below, you did say, quote, God is going to have elect infants and there are others who will not be, which seems to align with what you quoted Augustine saying more recently. We say one infant enters the kingdom of God by grace because God is good. Another infant deservedly does not enter because God is just. So that seems to be the same thing you've been saying. God has every right to show justice to elect adults and grace to vice versa, to non-elect adults, justice, to elect adults, show grace, just like he does with infants. Exactly what Augustine says that you read in support of his view. So you affirm some infants are elect and others are not, right? Is that not an accurate assessment of your current position? I certainly know you don't agree with everything Zwingli said because Zwingli denied inherited guilt. And after listening to that 2005 clip in context, I understand that Namer PB misrepresented your view as if you were speaking in favor of what Zwingli had said when you weren't, which makes me wonder why you liked his tweet and thanked him. Also, in the 1987 article, you did write, we have little to go on in discussing the condition of the infant or the mentally incompetent. Since they have made no conscious decisions against God, it is inconceivable. This is White in 1987, just to be sure you know what it's talking about. It is inconceivable that they undergo any kind of punishment. By the way, I still believe it's very inconceivable that infants would be punished by our God, just so you know. Rather, it is clear that they are ushered into the presence of the Lord. Ulrich Zwingli felt that all who died in infancy or were mentally incompetent were of the elect of God. And I feel comfortable with that idea. So White here in 1987 is saying that he feels comfortable with that idea that all infants are saved. I'm just not as safe to say that the sacrifice of Christ is, am I not just as safe to say that the sacrifice of Christ is sufficient for all infants and mentally incompetents? I could say that if I wished, if someone simply would not allow for babies to be innocent, have a sin nature while not yet being guilty of individual sin. In other words, he's arguing for my position now, is that babies are innocent and they are not guilty of individual sin, though they can still be under sin, the nature of sin or the corruption of sin, as we've argued in other episodes. So am I safe to say that you no longer support that 1987 view? In other words, I'm genuinely trying to figure out what he's saying, because he's supporting Namer and his words in one hand, and then saying he's disagreeing with me on other and criticizing me. I'm not going, what the heck, brother? Come on, help me out here. Also, I've never once accused you of affirming everything Zwingli or Augustine said. Believed because I'm not sure where that's coming from, to be honest. As always, I welcome a phone conversation or cordial discussion on either of our broadcasts to talk these things through. This does not need to be so heated. The only reason I posted all that that I got today is because I was being accused of misrepresenting you when I knew for certain I was being careful to allow you to represent yourself in your own words. If you believe some infants who die may not be elect and thus will be punished, then you are in good company because, as I posted, those in Dort and many other Calvinists historically have held to similar views, some more staunch than others, which is why I was quite shocked to find out so many of your followers accuse me of spreading misinformation when I was just quoting you supporting a fairly commonly held view within the Reformed tradition. If I've misunderstood what you meant in the video clip below, please clarify so that we can clear it up once and for all. I honestly would rather that you held to Phil Johnson or MacArthur's view on this point. So it would be great to learn if you do. Just to be very clear, you differ from them according to the video, what you said. I look forward to March 7th. I will do my very best to listen to everything very carefully to what you say. Thanks for your time and consideration. And that's where the clip is that we've already played here a few dozen times, even in this broadcast, to demonstrate I'm not misrepresenting James White. I am letting him speak for himself in his own words, just to be clear. I want to, before we go back to the video, let me pull up a few of these super chats and catch up on some of the questions. Yeah, March 7th is the debate. It's sold out from what I've been told. And so if you haven't got tickets yet, you may just have to watch the stream. And I'm not sure if it's streaming live or if it'll come out afterwards, but it is being recorded. I do know that. Chris Harris, our resident Calvinist, says, just because you posit all infants who pass in infancy go to heaven. Okay. I posit that. Yes. John MacArthur posits that. Yes. Okay. So just because someone like a Calvinist like MacArthur or myself posit all infants who pass in infancy go to heaven doesn't mean you deny what the confession says about elect infants. I'm trying to understand what that means. Are you accusing me of denying that someone like MacArthur is denying the confession? In other words, MacArthur fits, I'm fine with both MacArthur and White fitting underneath the confessional boundaries. Okay, that's fine. He's acknowledging that if that's all he's arguing, what's the argument? Is that just another red herring? Is to say both MacArthur's view and my view fit under the London Baptist Confession of Faith, 1689. Okay, what's your point? You still hold to the fact that some infants that die go to hell, and you haven't defended that biblically against what MacArthur and other Calvinists say. And that's what we're talking about. Idol Killer responded to Harris, and he says, if we say all infants are saved, yes, that entails that some are saved, but it doesn't work the other way around. Yeah, and I think that's what he's trying to get to, is that you can't have it both ways. If you say there's elect infants and there's others that are not, like White does, then obviously you believe some infants are damned, and that's what we're contending with. Interruptus 165, thank you for your super chat. Looking forward to seeing the debate this March. I live in Houston. Where's the church located? Where you teach at? Located where it's being held. I don't teach in Houston, but it's being held at the First Lutheran Church. But like I said, it's sold out if you haven't already got tickets, just so you're aware. Okay. Let's see here. Trying to look and make sure I'm answering questions that are coming in. Somebody's asking about Acts 13:48. There are videos and articles at Soteriology 101 on Acts 13:48. For those that are interested, I would check that out. All right, let's move on with the video. I think there was a few other things I wanted to discuss from the video, and maybe I can catch up on some of y'all's questions.
From 2014 contained an extensive discussion of Judas, the man I was debating, who is now dead. The man I was debating, he did not die immediately thereafter. I want to clarify that right now. It was many years. But the man I was debating said Judas could have not betrayed Jesus. Remember what that was? Remember what the subject was? It was open theism. It was open theism. So how do open theists answer that question? The way that Leighton Flowers did.
Guilt by association is say, oh, look, I've been saying that Leighton Flowers is an open theist, even though I've never affirmed open theism. And now I've proven it because he gives the same answer that an open theist gave me in a debate once. Well, I'm also giving the same answer that William Lane Craig gave you too. And so both Molinist and open theists answer that question in the same way. And therefore saying, because Leighton gives the same answer as an open theist doesn't prove I'm an open theist, because I'm not. The reason that I get so much flack about open theism is because I don't throw open theists out of the kingdom as heretics, but I also don't throw Calvinist determinists out of the kingdom as heretics either. I'm an equal opportunity grace giver. I think grace covers those philosophical differences. Sue me. But I don't think that, obviously Molinist or open theism or the dynamic perspective or there's a bunch of flavors in between all of those, by the way, the Boethian kind of model, God outside of time kind of concepts that C.S. Lewis argues and all those kinds of things. All of those are philosophical ways to deal with a mysterious and infinite issue of God working within time and space. The way Calvinists deal with that issue is by saying God determines everything. Okay. God doesn't know the future because he's omniscient. He knows the future because he's deterministic. He determines everything that's going to happen. That's how he's able to predict everything that's going to happen, is because he's scripted it. He knows exactly what's going to happen, not because he's all-knowing and omnipresent, like we would argue, but because he's omnideterministic. So God's omnideterministic, therefore he can tell you what's going to happen with certainty. We say he's omniscient, meaning omnipresent, present at all places at all times. Above time, is one might argue. Therefore, he knows all things, and it's beyond our full comprehension as to how that happens and how that works within time and space. But we're not making speculations like the Calvinist is, i.e., God must determine it in order for him to know it, because we don't think knowledge is causal. Just so you know where he's coming from on that.
He says, yes, he could have chose not to betray Jesus and someone else could have, but if that is what happened, then that would have been the prophecy. The prophecy isn't the cause of the event. Now, this is where, no matter how hard he tries, Leighton's position's utterly incoherent. Every time he has been pressed, Chris Date pressed him on Genesis 50, the blather that came out of his mouth is just that. It's incoherent blather. It doesn't make any sense. Not only is it not connected to Genesis 50 at all,
my blather was to agree with my opponent and his grammatical arguments. If you remember, go back and listen to it. Chris Date misunderstood my argument and thought I was taking the same position as the guy he wrote about in his book, when in reality, I wasn't contending with his grammar or any of the contextual issues within the text itself. I was actually agreeing with Chris on that God intending a particular evil event to come to pass doesn't mean that God is the one who determines the motives and the sinful desires and thoughts of the brothers who brought it to pass. In other words, just because God intends a particular thing to happen doesn't mean he's the one who causes the evil that's involved in that thing that happens. That was my argument. And he just calls that blather, which is not an argument. It's just an insult. By the way, excuse me, let me catch you up as to what he's talking about for those that are wanting to see the back and forth theology. The arguments, how they originally came to pass. So, it started with the what guy saying, would God create someone just to damn them? He's asking that question. In other words, would God create someone just to damn them? This gets to the character of God. Okay, this gets to even the infant damnation issue is kind of built into the same question. Because if you're creating somebody without the ability to believe, you're creating to damn them. That's what your purpose is doing. That's basically the underpinning of the entire Calvinistic worldview. So would God create someone to damn them? It was prophesied centuries before he was born that Judas would betray Christ. Jesus called him the son of perdition, meaning that he was born to be destroyed. Yes, some are made for hell. See also Romans 9:22 through 24, which is why I wrote this book, so that you see that's not what Paul was talking about. He was not talking about damning somebody to hell before they're ever born. That's a horrible, horrible plight on God. That's why I write in response to the what guy. This is a gross misrepresentation of God based upon bad philosophy. Knowledge is not causal. The prophet is not foretelling what God has determined Judas to do. Let that sink in, okay? The prophet is not he's foretelling what Judas will freely choose to do. He's not foretelling what God has determined Judas to do. See the difference between that? He's doing one or the other. There's no really in between here. The prophet Isaiah, or whoever it is, whatever prophet is, Jeremiah, Isaiah, whoever's prophesying, they are not foretelling what God is causing a sinner to do by sinning. They're foretelling what the sinner is going to freely choose to do, even though they could have done otherwise. The prophecy is not causal. The prophecy is not causing the person to do it. The foretelling of it is not causing the person to do it. That's my argument. Judas freely, when I say freely, I don't mean compatibilistically freely, which is actually determinism that's done by desire. In other words, God determines his desire to do what he does, so he's doing what he wants, so they call it free. That's not freely on our view. Freely means he could have done otherwise, but he chose to do what he did, and the prophecy is telling us in advance what he's freely going to choose to do, right? Just like when Peter denied Christ 3 times. Just because Jesus said, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times, Jesus prophesying what he's going to do is not what causes Peter to do it. Okay, God's not causing Peter to deny him 3 times so as to give God the knowledge that he tells him what he's... No, he's revealing the free will of Peter by telling him, this is who you really are. You think you're this, but I'm telling you, I know what's going to happen, and here's who you really are, freely. And I don't have to be... God doesn't have to cause people to do stuff to know what they're going to do. And that's where this is where the lower view, Calvinism is a lower view of God, because they basically have God determining everything in order to know it. And that's not foreknowledge. That's foredetermination. It's like if I had an avatar world that I created in like a second life world or whatever, where they have all the avatars and everything else. And I created and programmed everything that happens in this world and exactly what's going to happen over the next 48 hours and every little decision, every little thing that they make, and they react to this and this, and I pre-program and I write it all out and I code it all out and everything. And then I foretell you what's going to happen in my avatar world over the next 48 hours. Is that impressive to you? No. Why? Because I pre-programmed. I determined everything that they're going to do and how they're going to react and everything. Every little avatar is going to move and act exactly as I coded it to. There's nothing supernatural about me foretelling you what that world will do because I coded it to do exactly that. You're just going to go, okay, thanks for telling me what you coded your world to do, Leighton. Okay, what's supernatural about that? Absolutely nothing. Right. What's supernatural is if I could tell you, everyone who's listening, there's 300 plus listening right now at the moment. If I could foretell what every single one of you was going to choose to do tomorrow over the next 48 hours, that would be supernatural, wouldn't it? Of course it would. Why? Because I have not coded what you're doing. I'm not determining what you're doing. You're deciding freely what you do, but yet supernaturally, I'm able to prophesy what you do. That's a supernatural thing. And that's what we're saying. God's able to foretell what somebody will freely do, not simply foretell what he has coded or determined or pre-programmed them to do. Before we move on, let me get a super chat or 2 in here, and we'll come back to the video in just a second. Zugi Michaels, thank you for your super chat. Dr. Flowers, I had a disdain for you once as a former Calvinist. Your kind character won me over and caused me to lend an ear. By the grace of God, I can say I am able to enjoy Christ again. Big hugs. Appreciate that. I can't tell you guys how many messages I get like that on a weekly basis, and that's why I keep doing this. Honestly, some people go, how in the world do you keep doing what you're doing? I keep dealing with all this stuff from everybody. It's messages like that. Honestly, it's messages like that. And some even more, sometimes longer, more intense and thankful. One guy who contacted me, I'm trying to remember his name now. It's been several months. But he said, man, I know you've got me blocked on Twitter. And he said, and rightly so, you should have me blocked on Twitter. What I said was horrendous, and I'm sorry. He said, but I've actually been listening to your programs, and I'm actually a provisionist now. And I'm right on board with you. In fact, he even showed me a couple of videos that he had put out, that he was trying to help the cause. I gotta remember his name. I'll have to go back to it. But he was saying, could you unblock me? Because I said, I don't even control half those, because a lot of people, I was like, I don't know sure how to unblock somebody. So I had to figure out how to find this guy to unblock him. And so to be able to add him back, because he's come around, and because he had said some really bad things about me at the time. And so same kind of thing. I get those kinds of messages all the time, which is what gives me hope, that there are people who can be really, 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 really sealed, look like they're sealed in their beliefs, that end up turning. We've had some of them on the program. One even debated Braxton Hunter as a Calvinist. Y'all remember that, the whole thing? And we had him on to talk through his views. Matter of fact, I think he may be at the debate in Houston. Chris Harris, thank you for your super chat. Did God know what Judas do before creating him? If yes, see, this is where the argument goes. See, if God foreknows it before he creates him, and he creates him anywhere, therefore he's determining him to do what he does. And so he's starting at the wrong starting point. Why does God know what he's going to do? Because he determined him to do it, or because he's all knowing? That's the question you have to ask yourself, Chris, on the philosophical side of thing. Is his knowledge based upon what Judas will freely choose to do in time? When I say freely, I always mean libertarianly freely. So take it that way. Okay. Don't take it compatibilistically freely. I'm talking libertarianly freely. Does God know what Judas will freely do prior to creating him? If your answer is yes, that's a middle knowledge, you could even call it, because it hasn't happened yet. But God actualizes the world, is the way they put it in the philosophical framework, and how that would work, if you're going to go the Molinist route, that is. Then what you're saying is that God has chosen to not intervene and not stop Judas from doing what he does freely. But that's not the Calvinistic worldview, Chris. He doesn't know what Judas is going to do because he knows what he will do freely. On Calvinism, he knows what he will do because God decreed for him to do it. Now, that may not be your form of Calvinism, because I've heard you say over and over again, well, the decree is not casual, blah, 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 and all those kinds of things where you say it's not that way. And I go, okay, well, here's 14 quotes telling you otherwise from Calvinists who do declare that the decree is causal, that God is determining their nature from birth. That's what the T of tulip is all about. If you affirm the T of tulip, then you're affirming this idea, because if he's a reprobate, meaning he's born by decree unable to believe what God says and to follow him, and if Judas is a reprobate, which obviously he would be on Calvinism, it means he was born under the T of tulip, which means he was born by decree, determined by default to be unable to believe what God taught him. We don't believe that. We believe Judas became the kind of person of character that he was by choice, freely. He could have done otherwise. And had he done otherwise, that's the prophecy would have reflected that. Or another person might have been chosen for apostleship that had a character that was flawed. Why Judas's was better? Because the prophecy is not determining what's happening. It's declaring what freely people are going to choose to do, and how God's going to use that in his plan and for his purposes. And so I don't know how to be more clear about that. And this has been written about thousands of pages from philosophers that know a lot better how to talk about these things than I'll ever hope to do. Just to be clear, there's a lot more out there. I'm just trying to catch up on the super chats here. Choopy, thank you for your super chat. Someone should ask Dr. White in the debate why he feels the need to treat a brother in such a demeaning way, given that Christ commands us to treat unbelievers with gentleness and respect. Well, there'll be open questions in the debate. I think they're probably going to be submitted and read by Evan, the pastor. And so I'm not sure he would read a question like that, because it has to deal with personalities and things like that. So you could try, if somebody's at the debate and wants to ask that question, feel free and see how he responds. And I will say this. I did hear somebody write into him or call into him or something like that. I can't remember how it came about, asking whether they thought I was a Christian or not. And he, to his credit, defended, yes, I believe Leighton is a Christian, and Michael Brown, and he reflected on others that I think they're wrong, but I do believe they know the Lord. They're true believers. They just believe bad theology, is what he argued. And then the follow-up, I think, was, why are you so mean to them? Why are you so rude to these guys? The whole "why are you so rude" video. And he said, well, I hold Christians to a higher standard than I hold the Muslim world, because they were comparing. You seem real respectful to Muslims. You seem more respectful to Muslims than you do to Leighton. What's up with that? And he replied by saying, well, because I hold, these guys to a higher standard because of Christians. And it really frustrates me when Christians who should know better are teaching bad theology, which doesn't explain why he treats me differently than Michael Brown, because Michael Brown and I, for the most part, on this issue at least, hold to very similar theological viewpoints. That is really weird. Where is that coming from? Huh. Anyway, my computer's popping up like somebody's trying to join the chat, and somebody's not there. It's just weird. Okay. Anyway, just making sure I got everybody's super chat. Did God know Judas? I got that one. Okay. All right. So, Warped Voyeurs says, or Warped Warriors, I guess, if the two V's are together, right? It says the very same people in John 6 are identified as sheep, having not a shepherd, Mark 6:34. And we know that Jesus giveth life for the sheep. Yeah. Give his life for the sheep. Amen. I don't know if you're trying to make a point for or against. Sometimes I get that a lot. There'll be that way on Twitter. You'll see somebody reply with a verse, just kind of say, here's a verse, and they'll throw a verse up there, and you just kind of like it, and you wonder, oh, maybe they're quoting that verse in favor of what you're saying, or maybe they're quoting that verse because they think it's contradicting what you're saying, but you don't know. You believe the verse and you see it as supporting what you're saying, but you don't know what their intention is. And so you don't know kind of how to respond to it. You're like, yeah, that's amen to that verse. What do you mean by it? I'm not really sure. But yeah, I mean, not that I could hear that I would disagree with. Oh, you're Zugi? I'm good. Oh, I'm good, Zugi. Okay, sorry. I thought Chris was saying he is Zugi, like he had two accounts or something like that. Oh, Warped is saying in favor of provisionism. Yeah, okay, good. That helps me to know where you're coming from. Sometimes you can't tell Warped. Sorry about that. I couldn't tell for sure what you were getting at. I would normally just assume that somebody who's giving a super chat is supporting of provisionism, but I think probably more than anybody else in the side chat who has given us super chats is Chris Harris. And so, Chris Harris is obviously not somebody who agrees with me, so I can't make a judgment based upon that whatsoever. All right.
As a demonstration of his glory.
Wrong one. All right. So back to this. So this is where I say it's a gross misrepresentation of God. He's foretelling what Judas would freely choose to do and how God will use that evil choice for his ultimate good. God does not even tempt men to do evil, according to James chapter 1. 1 John 2:16 says, pride and lust are not from the Father, but from the world. In other words, don't blame God for evil. Okay. Don't say that God's the one who marred the clay in his hands. No, the clay is what became marred in his hands because it's the clay's fault. Blame the clay, not the molder. Okay. And when Calvinists interpret Romans 9 without a reflection on Jeremiah 18, they will often interpret it as if God's the one who's molded some people to be wrong and to be flawed and to be sinners. And that's not what the point of the clay pot analogy is. It's when they go wrong, i.e. when Israel does wrong and goes their own way and becomes hardened and rebellious, the sovereign, the potter, has every right to remold and remake that marred lump into an ignoble vessel used for his own purpose and his own glory. And who are you to question him if he does that? That's the point of Romans 9, just like it is in Jeremiah 18. So don't blame God for when people go wrong. That's all on them. That's the fault of Calvinism. Calvinism makes God the author of evil. It makes God the one who mars the clay, as well as makes the clay well. It's like he's the fireman and the arsonist. He's doing both. He's setting the house on fire and he's putting out the fire. And that doesn't give God more glory. That removes God's glory by instead of saying he's redeeming the free sinful choices of creation, you've actually got God decreeing the sinful choices of creation so as to redeem what he decreed. You got God cleaning up his own messes, putting out his own fires, and it diminishes the glory and the goodness of God. And so that's why we're standing up against it so absolutely vehemently, like C.S. Lewis did when he said good philosophy good. Yeah, it says God philosophy. It says it's supposed to be good philosophy. I just recognize I have a typo there. Good philosophy must exist if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered. Well, good philosophy and God philosophy are one and the same. So God's philosophy is good, and determinism is bad philosophy as far as I can tell. So that's the tweet that he's talking about, and then that's when we get into this. Stephen underneath here says, "Could Judas have chosen not to betray Christ?" And that's when I reply, say, yeah, he could have chosen not to betray Christ if he wanted to. I mean, that could have been his choice, and someone else might have done it or whatever. But if that's what happened, then that's what the prophecy would have been. In other words, the prophecy is based upon what they freely choose to do. It's not based upon what God's determined them to do. That's the point of it. The prophecy isn't the cause of it, and neither is God. God's not determining it, okay? So that's the key there. And this is one I think that White replied to, if I'm not mistaken. The notion, I thought that was, yeah, this is, the one Reformed Knight says, this is a gross misrepresentation of God based on bad philosophy. And he's quoting me saying that. And he says, that's literally all you do, Leighton. So he's saying, you're the one who has the bad philosophy is basically what he's arguing. And I point out, the difference is if I'm wrong, then I'm doing it by sovereign determinative decree. And that's just a fact of the matter. I'm not trying to be funny. That's just a fact. That's just a truism of Calvinism, a truism of determinism. So the difference in the accusation is I'm claiming he's doing bad philosophy and coming to the wrong conclusion. He's saying the same thing about me. So what's the difference between the two? Well, if I'm wrong, then I'm doing what I'm doing because God determined me to do it ultimately, which is beyond my control. I can't help it. If you're wrong, however, if you're the one who's got bad philosophy, it's all on you because we don't believe determinism is true. So if you're doing bad philosophy, you need to stop. You're responsible for it. Whereas if I'm doing it, I don't really have any control over it. You can pray to God and tell him to stop determining you to do this, but otherwise what your rebuke doesn't make any rational sense as far as we can tell. All right, with that it said, let's go back to the video. I should have warned y'all, this is going to be a long one today. So let me share this one again and get back to the video where he left off. Here we go.
But it doesn't make sense when you press on it. And so notice the prophecy isn't the cause of the event. Well, no one's saying prophecy causes things. The question is, how does God...
Okay, he said prophecy doesn't cause things, but then he's going to go on to say God decrees it. So God causes it, and therefore, because God causes it, he can prophesy about it. In other words, he can tell Jeremiah what's going to happen because God's the one who's causing Judas to do what he does. So God is the one who determines Judas to do what he does, and therefore God can send a prophet to tell people what he's going to do. So he's kind of nitpicking the point there that the prophecy is not the cause of it. And he's admitting, yeah, prophecy is not the cause. But then he goes on to say the one who's prophesying ultimately, which is God, is the cause. And that's the point.
Have the ability to give prophecy. And Christians have always believed it's because prophecy causes things. The question, cause of the event.
Listen.
Well, no one's saying prophecy causes things. The question is, how does God have the ability to give prophecy?
So here's the question. How does God have the ability to give prophecy? Calvinist answer, the only way God has the ability to give prophecy is if he scripts, he codes, he programs, he determines, he decrees everything that comes to pass. He's the determinative cause of all that happens. Not that he foresees it, not that he just knows what people will do freely and then creates, like Harris was trying to argue earlier. That's not within the deterministic framework. The deterministic framework is the way God prophesies, how he knows what's going to happen, is he coded the world just exactly the way it's going to be. And that's how he knows. It's the only way he knows, which is a lower view of God, I think, than what the biblical view of God actually is.
And Christians have always believed it's because God has exhaustive knowledge of future events. Why do we believe that? Because the Bible says so. Okay.
And you're talking to somebody who affirms that. So make your argument based upon the fact that you're talking with somebody who affirms that God exhaustively knows all things that will come to pass, not what you're projecting onto me as believing, which I've never affirmed.
Okay, it's right there. That's why, some people in ETS tried to get rid of the open theists because they say, no, God does not have exhaustive knowledge of future events. He cannot know what free creatures going to do. or they're not free.
Which is the same view that Calvinists hold to. This is why William Lane Craig and some Molinists say that, and maybe the open theists don't like this, but it's just the argument, that open theism and Calvinists or determinists are strange bedfellows, in that they both hold to the philosophical view that if God knows something before it happens, that he must be the one who determines it. And therefore, the open theist removes God's knowledge or says that God doesn't know it, therefore it's free. Whereas the Calvinist says God must determine it. And you only call it free because they're doing what they want to, according to the desire that God also determined. Now, that's a very simplistic way of explaining it. There's some nuances within there from some of the more dynamic perspectives and how they would go there, just like there's more nuances in the way the Molinist. And frankly, when I listen to the Molinist and the guys who know what they're talking about from the more dynamic open, they sound a lot alike in their philosophical jargon. They have a lot of concepts about the middle knowledge and God knowing what could happen if this happened and that happened, and a swath of philosophical material on that topic. I don't claim, the reason people press me on this all the time, and White even chides me about not taking a stand as being a Molinist or being this view or that view or that view. And the reason I've quoted from Lewis in my book, and the reason that I have quoted from John Lennox with the that versus how and all those kinds of things, is because Lennox, a theologian, C.S. Lewis being more of a theological in his approach to these things, is saying we go as far as where the biblical revelation is, and we can step into speculative theology, as White called Calvinism in his last episode. We can step into speculative things with regard to some of these things. But that's where I don't take a hard stand if I'm speculating about how it could work within time and space. And this is why White likes to accuse me of being an open theist, because he knows open theists are pariahs. They're seen as heretics by his crowd, at least, if nothing else. And so if I can just throw Leighton in that crowd, then I really don't have to deal with Leighton as much anymore. Just like I can deal with Leighton like I deal with Warren. I can just treat him like he's this far off lunatic liar, and just throw him out there. I don't have to treat Leighton like he's a Texas Baptist denominational leader. I don't have to treat Leighton like he's serious in his scholarship or in his views. If I can just put Leighton over in that camp with those other openist guys. And the fact that I'm not willing to come right out and say, no, I'm a Molinist and affirm Molinism, that frustrates him. Why then? Because then he can use the card player view and this thing and that thing and all these different objections he has against Molinism, and force me to defend myself. And I don't need to defend myself with regard to where the scripture is silent. I can simply present defeaters for your determinism and say, you think it has to be determinism. I'm not making a positive claim about how God knows the future free events. I just believe that it's true that he knows the future free events. I don't have to be able to explain how he knows it. Just like I don't have to be able to explain how God creates something from nothing, do I? To believe that? Of course I don't. And there's no reason I have to be able to explain how God knows what Judas will do freely without being the cause or the implicated as the fault and approver of transgressions. I don't have to be able to explain that he is not the author of evil, because I don't believe he is, because I don't believe he's determined Judas to do what he does. You're the one making the positive claim that he decreed Judas to do what he does. So you need to defend that biblically. I don't have to defend something you're making a positive claim about. When I appeal to a mystery of something and saying God doesn't tell us how it works, doesn't mean I don't have a positive view as to who God is or what he does say with regard to these things. And so you get into all the explanations about how that works. Zugi is another super chat. Thank you. So Dr. Flowers, Zugi again, considering that all people enter this world and will definitely commit sin inevitably, how can I maintain a high view of my sin despite knowing everyone's a sinner? Well, this is when you don't get in, you don't talk about your individual choice to sin as if it's inevitable, because either any one choice to sin is not inevitable that you sin. What's inevitable is that you will eventually fall into temptation. But anytime you're faced with a temptation, you're able, as a Christian especially, I would say, let's talk about Christians first. As a regenerate man, for 1 Corinthians 10:13, you have the ability to resist temptation. So that means that's libertarian free will. because he's given you a way out. So if you take the way out that he's given you, then you will resist that temptation. If you refuse the way out that he's given you, it's your fault, not a lacking of his provision. He's got it there for you. He's provided a way out. But if you refuse it and you go your own way and you fall into temptation, that's your fault. He's not the one tempting you. He's actually providing you a way out of your temptation. And so you can stand against it. Now, back up prior to your regeneration. And you're saying, okay, people will inevitably sin. I have no problem with saying that inevitably everyone will sin because of the fallen world and our inclinations. Our inclinations are such, and we're in a world as such, that everyone eventually will come to a place where they morally sin, where they break the law of God, where they will impugn God's character in some way or push back against the law of God or the truth of God. And I think all of us have experienced that in our own lives, where we have gone our own way and gone against our conscience in such a way that we knew we were violating our conscience and the law of God written on our hearts. We know what that feels like. And yes, I don't have any problem saying inevitably. Did I say 1 Corinthians 10:13? That's what I meant to say if I didn't say it. But yes, 1 Corinthians 10:13 is what I meant to say. And so inevitably everyone will fall, but don't treat every temptation as if it's inevitable that you will fall. And that's the same true with lost person. Just because a lost person faces the temptation, for example, he's in a store, he's tempted to steal an item off the shelf. He has the attendant there is distracted and turned around. He sees the item and thinks to himself, I could walk out that door with this and they wouldn't even notice. He's tempted, but he's not even a Christian. He's just a normal person. Can he resist following in that temptation? Yeah, he could. He could do either one. He's libertarianly free to steal the thing or not to steal the thing in that given moment. Okay. So I'm treating every single individual temptation or event as if it's libertarianly free. But I'm saying that inevitably this person, whether it's a lustful thought, whether it's stealing something, whether it's lying, whether it's cheating, whatever it is, he's going to do something. Inevitably, he's going to fall into sin, into temptation because of his humanness and his fallenness in a fallen world. And the analogy I used before that the Twitter world jumped on and the Calvinist world jumped on was just happened to be football season at the time I used it, was the inevitability that a NFL kicker is going to miss a kick. And I wasn't trying to, as I was accused of saying, oh, Leighton Flowers treats sin as if it's just a football kick. Oh, blah, 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 and clutching their pearls. I was like, okay, guys, come on. I'm using an analogy about the inevitability of something with regard to what's feasible versus what's possible. Is it logically possible that a NFL kicker will never, ever once in his entire career with thousands of kicks, he will never actually miss or get blocked ever? Is it logically possible? Yes, of course it is. It's a logical possibility that every single kick that he makes every single kick that he attempts to make will actually go through the uprights and never get blocked and never have a problem or never have wind or an issue with whatever. What logically that's possible. Is it feasible? Will it ever happen? Inevitably, no, it never happens because there's too many faults. There's too many flaws. There's too many, circumstances that would never allow that to actually take place. And I was using that as an example to give people to understand the difference between feasibility and what's feasible versus what's logically possible. And so when people say, well, is it logically possible that a person could resist every temptation that comes their way, that a person, yeah, that's logically possible. You might for those that hold to the age of accountability, for example, you might have somebody who's reached the age of accountability, whether that's 7 or 17 or 25, who knows where the age of for one individual to another. But let's say somebody reaches an age of accountability, an age of consciousness, of understanding right and wrong, of knowing that God's calling them, and they reach that age of accountability. And let's say they make 2 or 3 moral choices that are right, in the right direction. They're going towards the right way. In other words, they are not tempted to sin. Though they're tempted, they don't choose to sin. And tragically, they die in a car accident after they've made 2 or 3 moral choices that are right. Are you going to say, okay, well, that person, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever it is, that person's going to go to heaven because they're innocent? Same thing with the whole infant damnation thing that we were discussing earlier. what is God basing this number of choices that he made when faced with temptation, based upon the choices he made, whether he actually morally committed a breaking of the law against God? I mean, how are you judging that? One, we only see the fruit, God sees the root. God knows the heart of the child. God knows his intentions. God knows all feasible worlds, or as philosophers would argue. My point is that, everybody makes a different number of kicks to the upright, so to speak. Everyone faces a number of choices that they make throughout their lives. And so obviously the longer you live in a fallen world with a fallen nature or inclinations and sinful desires, the more oftentimes you're going to mess up, obviously. Then, obviously a 17-year-old is going to mess up more than a 7-year-old. Why? Because he's existed longer. He's kicked more kicks, so to speak. And so acknowledging that is not trying to say that people aren't inclined towards sin, that the fall has no consequences whatsoever, and that sin is exactly like a football kick or any of those kinds of things. It's simply helping people to understand the difference between a logical versus what would be feasible, a logical possibility versus what's feasible. All right, let me move along here to the next portion. Let's go.
You can't know what an autonomous creature is going to do, or he's not autonomous. That's the argument, and they're right.
Notice who's right. The open theist. God can't know what an autonomous creature would do. That's a lower view of God than me, because I do believe God knows what an autonomous creature would do. God knows what Satan would do freely. That's all autonomous means. Autonomous means separate from God. Go listen to John Piper answer the question, what about Satan's first sin? I think that's even now the title of it is, why did Satan fall in the first place? And listen to Piper's explanation. And he says at the very end of that explanation, he says something to the effect of, well, maybe, I don't know if it answers this, but maybe it's something that God distanced himself from Lucifer, that he turned his face, that he allowed him to go his own way, that he separated himself from Lucifer. What separation? That's another word for autonomy. Separation. In other words, freedom gave him ability to do his own thing, to go his own way, which is what free will is all about. That's the explanation we're giving, is we're saying when Satan fell, he acted autonomously. We don't have to have God controlling or determining Satan's actions in order for God to be sovereign. That's a very low view of God.
They're exactly right. So it's not that the prophecy is causing the event. The question is, how does God have the knowledge of what's going to happen in the future? Now, if you just use the simple foreknowledge view, then you are stuck with God created and then learned what the result was. Because if he creates and forms the fabric of time, including the events within time, then he has a decree. And that means what happens has purpose and intentionality, and all of it can result in the glory of God and all that kind of stuff, which we know they don't believe that part. Okay.
That's where you need to go and read some of the scholars, the philosophical scholars, on what he just said. Because what he just said is the way in which he frames it is God learning. Because in his mind, the only way that an all-powerful, all-knowing God could just foresee something, it would be like a crystal ball. Like if y'all had a crystal ball, every one of us, and we just had a crystal ball sitting here, and we looked into it and we watched, okay, I'm going to watch James White's going to eat a BLT tomorrow for lunch. Okay, I see it. I'm watching it. Okay, what did happen? I just learned what James White's going to eat tomorrow for lunch by watching it in the crystal ball. What would be hilarious is if James White never heard about this video and he eats a BLT tomorrow at lunch and then he watches this. That would be so cool. I hope that happens. Lord, I don't ask for much. I'm just wondering. That would be really funny. Anyway, okay, back to the seriousness. We watch the crystal ball. We see James White eat a BLT for lunch tomorrow. Okay, we learned it. That's the way he views our view of God. Okay, we think that God's peering through the quarters of time and he's looking to see, oh, okay, that's going to happen. Okay, now I know. Now I'm learning that. And that's not the way any Molinist, even the dynamic guys aren't that low of a view of God from what I've understood. Now that's the way it's caricatured, is God peering through the future like Matt Chandler did. Remember Matt Chandler said, Arminians, they believe God gets into a DeLorean and travels into the future and sees who is going to do what, and then makes his choice based upon what he learns, basically the way he characterized Arminians. Go read the best philosophers from the Arminian perspective, and none of them use the concept of God learning in that way, because that's not the way in which the philosophers from this perspective understand God being. Read C.S. Lewis. I quote him in here verbatim, talking about how God being outside of time, or how the infinite qualities of God supersede the finite reality that we live in. And then you get into the whole A and B series of time. This is when all the philosophers begin to do all their speculative stuff. And sometimes it makes me kind of, my eyes roll up in the back of my head, and I'm going, oh, okay, this doesn't have anything more to do with theology. This has to do with speculative philosophy based upon your understanding of time and space and how that works. It's like a bunch of nerds getting together to debate how, Michael J. Fox traveled back in time in 1985 and how that affects us today, and all these kinds of fun, goofy little speculations about time travel.
But if it's just simple foreknowledge, there cannot be purpose. It's just God saw that Judas was going to do this. It can't be that it was God's intention to use Judas in this way. Because
that's us. That you're buttering the bread on our table there when you said that. Yes, we believe God knows and uses Judas. We don't believe God causes or decrees Judas to be who he was in his evil state. God knows Judas's intentions. He uses, just like the brothers of Joseph, he knows their intentions. He doesn't have to cause their intentions. He doesn't decree their intentions. He knows those intentions and uses them for his own purposes, for his own good. So again, you're buttering the bread on our table when you use that kind of vernacular of God knowing and using, because we believe God knows and uses. You believe God decrees their intentions. God's the one who sovereignly brought about their intentions, not that he just knows it and uses it.
That means then God is sovereignly ordering the events in time to a particular end. Can't do that. That destroys free will, libertarian free will as well.
No,
you got to get rid of that.
No, God knowing and using people who are making free choices is exactly what all of us say from our vantage point. But he characterizes it as if that's not what we're saying. But again, he's using the exact same verbiage we use, same vocabulary, different dictionary, and then saying, but they can't have that because that wouldn't match up with free will, as if that would contradict free will. God knowing what somebody will freely do, like Pharaoh, and blinding him in his rebellion so as to ensure that he does exactly what he knows he would do given those circumstances, is exactly the way most Molinists I know, and almost everybody, classical theists that have held to omniscience all along the way, believes. And why you don't, it seems to be quite baffling to me personally.
Then you have the Molinists, and I'm not even going there, not anymore. I'm so thankful that in the new...
Maybe because the Molinists actually go toe-to-toe with you like William Lane Craig did when he walked all over you in the last debate, because you refused to engage with the point of the debate, as we demonstrated on several other programs for those that didn't watch it.
Radio Free Geneva video that Tim put that little segment in from the debate at the same church we're doing all the debates at in this next trip, except for one, with Brother Stratton on Molinism, and the look on my face. You got to quit playing with the cameras here, dude. You keep making the lights. I'm sitting here going, what's good? I know, but that's the Cyrus question. And I think it's an answer to Cyrus. It says, he could have, if he wanted to, when Jesus prophesied that Peter would deny...
He's reading my tweet. He's asking the same question about Judas. Could Cyrus have done otherwise, is basically what he's asking. And I'm answering the question. Well, yeah, he could have chosen to do otherwise if he wanted to. He could have made other choices, just like I said with Judas. The prophecy is not causal, is basically what the argument I'm making.
Deny him 3 times. Did that mean Jesus caused Peter to want to deny Jesus, or was Jesus revealing the will of Peter? No one is arguing that God's prophecies could turn out to be wrong. We are arguing prophecy isn't causal. Well, open theists do argue repeatedly that God's prophecies were wrong. They do.
So there you go. Proving I'm not an open theist, because I'm not arguing that the prophecies are wrong. Now, I do argue in there that he might get to in a minute about Kala, and other things like that, where God can say, if you stay in Kala, Saul will come and kill you. They will hand you over. And that doesn't end up happening, but he told them that's what would happen. In other words, God has knowledge of what would happen had another choice been made. That's middle knowledge. It's an example of middle knowledge. Why anybody would deny that God has the knowledge or ability to know what would happen given other circumstances, like it, if you weren't watching this video, there are 300 folks that are watching this video right now. If you weren't watching this video right now, do you believe that God knows what you would be doing instead? Let's say I got a flat tire on the way here or something like that. Do you believe God would know what you're doing if I didn't start this program today, for whatever reason? Do you believe God has the ability to know what you would be doing right now? I think he has that ability. That's even a higher view of God than what the Calvinist holds to in some regard, because I believing he has the ability to know all possible contingencies, which is just infinitely vast in his knowledge and understanding. And that's what Molinists argue. In fact, that's what Warren argues. And that's what's baffling to me. Even though I may not side with Warren on every point, I don't understand most of the points that Warren holds to. He's kind of got a big brain, and so it's hard to grasp everything he says sometimes. But same with William Lane Craig and a lot of the philosophers that I contend with on these issues. I'm trying to, or contend with, or just listen to try to learn. Either one is when they're arguing these things, they're arguing for such a massive high view of God that's inconceivable. And when you listen to William Lane Craig or some of these guys talk about this, you're just going, oh my gosh, that view of God is just so absolutely inconceivable. That very likely might be the right view of God, because I can't even, my finite brain can't even begin to grasp it. The deterministic view of God is pretty simple. It's the code world. God coded everything, scripted everything that's going to happen. Every little thing that's going to happen, flat. Determinism, there's the most flat system known to mankind. This is one of the reasons he accuses me of flattening it out. What's he mean by that? Like I said before, because determinism is as flat of a philosophical worldview that anyone could invent, one who spells it out plainly. In other words, you spell out determinism plainly for everybody to understand without affirming it. Now, if you affirm it, you won't get accused of this. But if you don't affirm it while spelling it out very plainly, you will always be accused of flattening it out by someone like James White. Because what are you doing? You're explaining what determinism is in a plain enough way that people get it and realize how untenable it really is, how unlivable it really is. That's what it comes down to. All right. We're getting close to our end here.
They do. Listen to the last program I did on Unbelievable with John Sanders. He argued very strongly that prophecy is not something that is certain at all. And as I pointed out in that debate.
And so this is a guy who accused me of being an open theist. And now he's saying open theists say prophecy may or may not, God's prophecy that's true and from God may or may not come about. And I don't argue that. I say prophecy will come about because God knows the future. And so he seems to be kind of, you can't have your cake and eat it too there, White. You can't accuse me of being an open theist and then show that I'm arguing something against what open theists say. Pick your battles.
Debate in 2014. In John 13:19, Jesus says to the disciples, from now on, I'm telling you before it takes place. So when it does take place, you may know and believe and understand that I am he. Ego eimi. Jesus made his ability to reveal future events to his disciples a ground of their being able to know who he truly is, the I am.
No problem with any of that.
So, yes, people are arguing that God's prophecies could turn out to be wrong.
But I'm not one of those people.
But again, if you believe in libertarian free will, there is no way for God to prophesy what a truly free-willed person is going to do before they do it. Otherwise, they don't have the choice to do anything else.
He's conflating certainty with necessity, because God knows with certainty what you will choose to eat tomorrow. Just like I know with certainty, you're going to eat a BLT tomorrow because I saw it in my imaginary crystal ball. I know for certain it's going to happen, assuming the crystal ball is actually factual, correct whatsoever, and you're absolutely going to do exactly what I foresee you doing. So I see you eating the BLT tomorrow at noon. It's certain you're going to do it. Does that mean that I'm the one causing it? Of course not. Is it necessitated? Is it determined that you will do it? No, there's a difference between necessity and certainty. I can know with certainty that something will happen, or not I, but God can know for certainty that something will happen without being the one who necessitates it, determines it. Because that's a higher view of God, because on Calvinism, they think the only way God can know it is if he necessitates it. God has to determine it in order to know it. We don't think knowledge is causal like they do. So it's a different starting point philosophically.
This is not a new conversation. I remember years and years ago in seminary, a lot of classes you take in seminary, you have these books that will give you snippets of this writer and snippets of that writer. And I just remember it was one of the few times that I was going, wow, this is really apologetically relevant. The discussions before the Reformation about this topic, this very issue, it's an old one. Nothing new about it at all. And I can guarantee you the viewpoints that the Provisionists are presenting were all known and rejected long ago.
Molinism was rejected. Yeah, Beza called it semi-Pelagianism, but there were debates over the topics and have been the Boethian model of God outside of time and kind of the basic answer of God being beyond time or above time. Those kinds of things were the predominant view throughout most of the Middle Ages and throughout most of Christian history. But there have been a variety of different perspectives. Have there been determinists throughout Christian history? Sure. They're usually the ones burning everybody else at the stake, but yeah, they were there for sure.
So also one must consider the fact that God can prophesy about something that would happen if things were different. Therefore, the thing that was prophesied actually does not happen, like when Saul was hunting David in the city of Keilah. Well, again, one of the open theists' favorite texts and one of the Molinists' favorite texts. But all that actually happened there was David said, will they turn me over to Saul? God says, yes, they will.
Okay, how does he know they will? How does God know they will? Middle knowledge. He knows something that actually does not come to pass. That means he knows something that is a contingent. It does not actually happen, but he knows it would happen. That's an example of middle knowledge. How is that not an example of middle knowledge? Which I think both dynamic and Molinist would believe. Of course, that's a good verse for that. How does that not support what they're claiming? I don't know.
David leaves. He didn't say, you're going to stay here and they're going to do that. He gives wisdom to his servant. And as a result, David and his men boogie someplace else.
So are you saying God didn't know for certain that they would have given him over? What's your argument there, White? How are you denying their point in making that argument? Doesn't make any sense. It's just like the 1 Corinthians 2, 7 and 8, where that's another one that William Lane Craig uses, that he said that the wisdom of God being hidden from their eyes, and had they known it, they never would have crucified the Lord of glory. In other words, they did crucify the Lord of glory, but he's saying this is what would have happened had those truths not been hidden from them, using parabolic language and stuff. And so had he not hidden it from their eyes, they would not have crucified, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. But having the fact that he did hide it from their eyes, using parabolic language, they did crucify him. So that's an example, again, of middle knowledge. God knows what would have happened otherwise. And that's a good example of that.
This is not middle knowledge. This is not well, if then, anything like that at all. Here's the issue. If God reveals that Judas is going to betray Christ and reveals this in Scripture, Judas is going to do it. And it's not because, well, Judas doesn't want to, but God's going to force him. No.
Who's saying that? Nope. No one of us. But who determines Judas's wants on Calvinism? God does. God decrees whatsoever comes to pass, including Judas's wants, his desires. They're all decreed by God. We don't believe that. We believe that Judas chose freely to act upon that desire when he could have chosen to act upon another desire, because he's a free moral creature. The fact that God knew it beforehand does not mean he's the determiner of it.
No, In reality, God restrains evil. He doesn't, again, if they had a biblical anthropology, if they had a biblical doctrine of God, if they recognized that the poison of asps is in our lips and took it seriously.
Literally? You literally have asp poison under your, asp poison, excuse me. I'm going to get demonetized. Sorry. This is live broadcasting here. I got to be careful how I speak. Asp poison. Asp. Oh, I can't rewind. Okay, we'll just move along.
Seriously. Then it wouldn't be, oh, poor Judas. He's just such an innocent guy, and God's making him do bad stuff. It's ridiculous.
Well, we're not the ones saying that. Y'all are. Y'all are the ones saying he was decreed from birth to do no clip. Jamie, no clipping. Y'all be nice. We're not the ones saying that Judas is the one doing this, or Judas is being forced to do this. Y'all are. Yeah, if we're mocking anybody, we're mocking the people who are trying to blame God for what Judas did. Judas should be blamed for that, not God, not God's decree. We want to blame Judas. This is the whole thing. The reason we defend free will is because we're defending the blameworthiness of the sinner. We think Judas should be blamed for what he did, not God's decree. We think Hitler should be blamed for what he did, not God's decree. That's the whole point. We don't want to say they couldn't have done otherwise, because saying they couldn't have done otherwise suggests they have a good excuse for what they did, right? What better excuse is there? God decreed, God determined, God decided that I would do this, and I could not have chosen to do otherwise. There's no better excuse than that.
It's absurd. If you have a biblical view, then you understand Judas is a bad guy. His heart has not been changed. He loves money. And people will do some really...
Who decreed his love for money? God did on Calvinism. Who decided for him to act in accordance to his love of money? According to Calvinism, God did. Who decided to do that on Provisionism? Judas did, freely. He could have done otherwise. So who's the one blaming Judas? And who's the one blaming ultimately God's decree as being decisive as to what Judas would choose to do? You tell me.
Really bad stuff for a small amount of money, which he ended up doing. But what if he decided to do that 6 months earlier? You don't have a decree in Provisionism. There's no decree determining these things. There's no decree forming the fabric of time. And so what if 6 months earlier, something unforeseen happened? And
notice what he says. Something unforeseen happens. In other words, something that God didn't know, God didn't see. Are any of us saying that? Or maybe the open theists or extreme open theists would say maybe God doesn't see what's going to happen there. But I'm certainly not making that argument. But notice that's the premise for this. Something unforeseen happens. In other words, something God didn't know about happens, I guess.
A friend of Judas got in trouble with the Romans, needed extra money. And Judas is like, I think I know I could get some money. You see, the crucifixion needs to take place in a certain place, at a certain time, in a certain way, to fulfill all these prophecies and to accomplish redemption. But once you get rid of the decree, now you've got all these libertarian, free, autonomous creatures just doing their things. And if you're a open theist, God doesn't even know what they are. And Leighton can say, well, yeah, God does know, but he can't tell us how, and still defend libertarian free will. Can't be done.
There it is right there. That's why I use the Lennox quote. He insists that I have to tell him how God knows future free events. How in the, nobody can, what? It'd be like, it would be like an atheist in your next debate, James White, saying, do you believe God created something from nothing? And you say, yes, absolutely, because the scripture says this, this, and this, and therefore God created something from nothing. Okay, can you explain how God creates something from nothing? And if you can't, then it must be untrue. Go ahead. Explain it. I'm waiting. Explain how God created something from nothing. Go ahead. Oh, you can't? Oh, therefore he must not be able to create something from nothing. That's a ridiculous argument, right? I don't have to be able to explain to you how God created something from nothing to believe that he did. In the same way, I don't have to be able to explain to you how God knows the future libertarianly free choices of creatures to be able to claim that he does. Now, Molinist and dynamic guys and open theist guys, can jump in there and give all their speculations as to how God accomplishes that. And determinists, you're jumping right in there the pool with them, and you're saying the way God does it is by scripting it. He pre-codes it. He causes it ultimately by his decree decisively. And we're saying, that's not the Bible. That's your philosophy read into the text based upon something that Augustine introduced into the church in the 5th century. But it's nothing that we see in the text. We're not convinced by it. And God certainly hasn't determined us to believe it, obviously. So we're going to continue to contend for the fact that God knows what people will do freely, because that seems to be the most intuitive understanding of the text. And I don't have to have a perfect philosophical answer as to how God does something in order to believe that he does it, period.
Be done. Every attempt has failed. And so why couldn't Judas decide to betray Jesus early? Why not one of the other disciples? We're not told. Biblically, we are told that Jesus over and over again said, my hour has not yet come.
Exactly. His hour has not yet come. In other words, he has control over some things. We're not contending with the fact that God determines some things. And the hour and the date of his crucifixion is one of those things. And guess what? Just like a police officer can orchestrate a sting operation at a particular time and place, so too, God, how much more so can God orchestrate a particular event at a time and place for his own good purposes? Of course he can. Of course, Dr. White's rebuttal to that analogy was to say, police stings fail all the time. Okay, well, guardrails fail all the time too, but you use guardrails in one of your sermons as an illustration. You use a lot of illustrations where those things, whatever illustration it is. Jesus used a lot of illustrations where you could say, well, shepherds fell all the time. Well, rocks break all the time. And God's compared to a fortress. Well, I know a fortress that fell once. Okay, what's the point of that? The analogy is to demonstrate that if a faulty or a flawed man can pull off a sting operation at a particular time and place without being the one who determines the evil people to act in evil ways, like a police officer can, how much more can our perfect God, knowing the intentions and hearts of people and knowing all possible contingencies and what would happen in any given circumstance, bring about his purposes without having to determine evil? You don't have to make God guilty or even imply he's implicit in sin in order to bring about the crucifixion.
I want to believe in a theology that understands what that says. And that ain't provisionism. And that ain't open theism. And that ain't Molinism at all. Then the last one here. This is a gross misrepresentation of God based on bad philosophy. Knowledge is not causal. The prophet is not foretelling what God has determined Judas to do. Really?
Yes, really. The prophecy is not telling us what God has determined Judas to do, because God doesn't even tempt men to sin, James 1, much less causally determine men to sin. You don't need determinism to get Judas. Knowledge can do that. God can know his future free choices, and he can bring about his purpose. So the prophecy is not foretelling what God is causing Judas to do. It is foretelling what Judas will freely choose to do and how God will use it for his own redemptive good.
I would say to you, the reason the prophet can foretell what Judas is going to do is because God has decreed that it's going to happen in this way, at this time, in this place.
So he just blamed, whether he intended to or not, he just blamed God's decree for the betrayal of the Christ. Even though everywhere in the scripture, Judas is the one to blame for that and is condemned for that. And it makes absolutely no rational sense as to why God would say, in one hand, that Judas is the one who freely chose to do this, or blame him and treat him as if he's responsible, while on the other hand saying that he was born in a condition where he couldn't have done otherwise. And there's no explanation as to how that works. The best apologetic they have for that is pulling Romans 9 out of its context to say, oh, who are you to question me, oh man? Which means, who are you to question our interpretation of this passage, oh man? And instead of looking at the fact that the potter clay analogy is really about those who've marred themselves in the hand of the potter, not those the potter himself has marred.
Just like the second coming, just like everything else that's certain in God's purposes. You know, all my days written in his book. That's Psalm 139 stuff. bad philosophy. It's just Bible. We need philosophy. He is foretelling what Judas will freely choose to do. Yep, he definitely did so. He did freely choose to do. And how God will use that evil choice for his ultimate good. It's Judas's evil choice, but it's under the decree of God. And that's where provisionism has always just gone, because you can't have those two biblically revealed realities. That's why when he tries to do Genesis 50, he falls apart. When he tries to do Isaiah 10, he falls apart. When he tries to do Acts 4, falls apart. Can't handle it. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't have those things.
Invited you on after the first time you went over Genesis 50 to point out the thing we pointed out in that original reply to Genesis 50, where you kept ignoring our point of contention and avoiding the fact that I was saying that God did not need to determine the intentions of the brothers in order to intend the event to happen. And you kept dodging that issue and would not hit the point of contention over and over and over again. You kept missing it. God does not need to decree evil intentions in order to bring about a particular event, even that may be morally evil. In other words, God can intend that a moral evil event happen, like the selling of Joseph, without being the one who intends, i.e. causes, i.e. decrees, the intentions of the brothers to kill in the first place. And when you talked about earlier, God restraining evil, what's he restraining? His own decree? He decrees them to do this one thing, but then he steps in and stops them from doing what he decreed them to want to do. He decrees Jonah to want to run away from Nineveh and go to Tarsus. He decrees him to want to do that. And then he steps in with a big fish and thwarts what he decreed him to want to do. Doesn't make any sense. The contending of the wills is proof of free will. There's no will to contend with if there's not a free will. Jonah in that situation has his own will to run from Nineveh. God uses a big fish to thwart his free will, showing how God would restrain or contend with the free will of man. And God does that. And he can smite somebody if he wants to smite somebody. He can do a lot of things to convince their wills to change, especially when it comes to his messengers, because if he promises, Potter's promise, if he promises to bring a message to a people and his servant is not obedient, God has at his disposal bright lights and big fish and other things to convince his messengers to go where he wants them to go. Hey, Paul, you're persecuting the people I'm calling you to witness to take the gospel to. And he has a big light to convince him of that fact. Just like he had a big fish with Jonah to convince him to go where he wants him to go. God has ways in which to convince his messengers to do and to go where he wants them to go. But Calvinists interpret that to be about sovereign election, i.e. deterministic election, i.e. individuals being chosen for salvation. But as I've said 1,000 times, and I'll continue to say, proof that God uses outward external means like bright lights and big fish to convince his messengers to go deliver the message to whom he wants it to be delivered does not prove that God uses some kind of secret, inward, irresistible means to make certain people believe that message when he gets there. And that's the conflation of the Calvinists when it comes to these kinds of stories.
So, but notice the utilization of philosophical language there rather than, hey, I prefer theology and I want my philosophy to deal with that. Okay. Wow. I knew things would be going fast here. Let's close these down. And
yep, that's the end of that. Okay. So thank y'all for tuning in. 3.5 hours. No, it's not the 4 to 6 hours a week yet. This is my only video for this week, and probably the only video for a little bit longer because I got a lot of things I've got to get done. But I do appreciate those who have tuned in. Thank you again, once again, all of you for the super chats, and for those who've asked really great questions and some of the side chat encouragement that I've seen along the way. I appreciate that, and help spread the news of God's love and provision for all people. That's an important point for us to continue to highlight. And as we always say, go now, share Christ and show love. God bless.